Welcome, gentle traveller. Settle yourself deeply just as you are, and allow your shoulders to soften like fresh snow easing from a quiet winter rooftop. Tonight we shall slip quietly backward through the long corridors of time, drifting into an age when the great steel arteries of America hummed beneath skies streaked with coal smoke and silver stars. Imagine, if you will, the muted amber glow of a gas lamp warming a polished mahogany corridor, the gentle hush of velvet curtains swaying with the rhythm of distant wheels, and the faintest perfume of brass polish lingering in the still evening air. There is no urgency here, no place we must arrive, no schedule to keep. There is only the slow, measured breath of a locomotive somewhere far ahead, and the quiet promise of comfort waiting just beyond the doorway. Allow your eyelids to grow heavy, as though weighted by a soft snowfall, and let your breathing match the steady cadence of iron wheels rolling over endless rails. We are going to step aboard one of the most luxurious creations of the 19th century, the Pullman Palace Car, where chandeliers swayed gently above hand-stitched cushions and porters moved silently through carpeted aisles like figures in a half-remembered dream. The world outside is dimming now, the city lights growing distant, and somewhere ahead, a long whistle calls softly through the gathering dark. Close your eyes now, traveller, and let the rhythm of the rails carry you gently, gently into a quieter century. Before we journey deeper into this softly swaying world of polished wood and lantern light, allow yourself one final moment of settling. Adjust your pillow if you must, draw the blanket a little closer, and let the warmth of this quiet room hold you gently in place. Some travellers, you see, return again and again to these slow corridors of history, finding in them a kind of sanctuary, a place where the mind may rest and wander without ever needing to hurry. If you are one of those wanderers who seeks the comfort of forgotten places, who finds peace in the soft hush of stories spoken slowly into the night, then perhaps you may wish to leave a small token of your visit here. Quiet tap of the subscribe button, a gentle press of the bell, and the lantern in the window of this little channel will be lit again the next time we venture together into the past. There is no rush, no demand, only an open invitation, drifting like a paper boat upon a calm midnight river. And should you feel moved to do so, a single thumbs up sends a quiet ripple of encouragement across the long miles and lets us know that the rails have carried you somewhere worth returning to. Now, with the lamp dimmed and the world made small around you, let us step onto the platform, where the warm breath of the locomotive curls softly into the cool night air, and history waits. The platform stretches before us like a long ribbon of weathered planks, each board worn smooth by countless travellers who have passed this way before, their footsteps faded now into the patient grain of the wood. The year is 1885, and the great depot of Chicago rises around us in a cathedral of cast iron and frosted glass, its vaulted ceiling arching high overhead like the ribcage of some enormous slumbering creature. Gaslight flickers softly in tall lamps spaced evenly along the platform, each flame trembling within its glass shell, casting pools of warm amber light that overlap and dissolve into one another, creating a soft golden river of illumination that seems to float just above the planks themselves. The air here carries a particular fragrance that one rarely finds in our hurried modern world. There is the deep mineral scent of coal dust, fine and dry, settling in patient layers upon every surface. There is the warm, oily perfume of axle grease and the faint sweetness of pipe tobacco curling from the lips of older gentlemen who lean against iron pillars in their long woolen overcoats. Somewhere nearby, a vendor in a neat white apron offers roasted chestnuts from a small brazier, and the gentle smoke from his fire mingles with the scent of fresh-cut flowers being arranged in tall glass cases for the dining cars. All of these aromas weave together into a single, complex, unforgettable atmosphere that lingers in the memory like a half-remembered lullaby. Listen now, gentle traveller, to the sounds that drift across this platform in the soft hush before departure. The rhythmic hiss of steam escaping from a brass valve, slow and patient as the breath of a sleeping animal. The distant clang of a brakeman's lantern, its handle tapping gently against the metal of the carriage as he walks the length of the train. the murmur of conversation in a dozen tongues, for travellers come here from every corner of the continent and from lands far beyond the ocean. Porters' polished boots tapping softly upon the planks, the soft creak of leather trunks being lifted onto baggage carts, and beneath it all the deep slumbering thrum of the great locomotive itself, a sound felt more in the chest than heard with the ears, as though the engine were a living heart waiting patiently to wake. The locomotive itself stands at the head of the train like a black iron stallion at rest, its great driving wheels taller than a grown man, its boiler painted in deep forest green with delicate gold pinstriping along every panel. The brass fittings have been polished to such a brilliant shine that they seem to glow with their own inner light, catching the gaslight and throwing it back in soft golden ripples across the dark metal. Thin curl of steam rises from the smokestack, drifting upward into the high vaulted ceiling of the depot where it dissolves slowly into the dim shadows above. The headlamp at the front of the engine has been freshly trimmed and lit, its great oil flame burning steadily within a polished silver reflector, ready to send a long beam of light into the gathering darkness of the prairie night. Now turn your attention, if you will, to the carriages themselves, for these are no ordinary railway cars. Each Pullman Palace Car has been built to a standard of elegance that would not be out of place in the grand hotels of Vienna or Paris. The exterior wood is rich, deep mahogany, polished until it gleams like still water at twilight, with windows of beveled glass set into delicate brass frames. The name of each car has been hand-lettered in gold leaf along the side, names like Glencoe and Ariadne and Pioneer, names borrowed from poetry and mythology and the wild geography of the American frontier. Beneath each window a small ornamental panel has been carved with floral motifs of exquisite detail, every leaf and blossom rendered with the patience of a craftsman who knew that his work would travel 10,000 miles before any human eye paused long enough to truly notice it. A conductor in a dark blue uniform with shining silver buttons walks slowly down the length of the platform, his boots making a soft measured rhythm upon the planks. His pocket watch, attached to a heavy gold chain, swings gently with each step, and from time to time he draws it forth and consults it with the gravity of a priest reading from Scripture. The conductor's face is weathered but kind, his moustache neatly trimmed, his cap set at the precise angle prescribed by the company's regulations. He nods to passengers as they pass, his voice low and reassuring, his manner unhurried, for the Pullman Company has impressed upon all its servants that haste is the enemy of elegance, and elegance is the very soul of this great enterprise. Above the platform, the depot's enormous clock face shows the hour creeping slowly toward 9 in the evening, its long brass hands moving with a calm deliberation that seems almost reluctant. The clock is housed within a tower of decorated iron, surrounded by gas globes that cast a halo of golden light against the deepening blue of the dusk sky visible through the high windows. From somewhere far above, a flock of pigeons stirs gently in the rafters, their wings making the softest of fluttering sounds before settling once more into the warm shadows of the great vaulted ceiling. The travellers themselves move with a quiet dignity befitting the occasion, ladies in long travelling dresses of dove grey and bottle green, their hats trimmed with feathers and silk ribbons, their gloved hands resting lightly upon the arms of their gentlemen companions, gentlemen in dark frock coats and tall silk hats, their walking sticks tapping softly upon the planks, their pocket watches gleaming faintly beneath their waistcoats, children, wide-eyed and silent with wonder, clutching the hands of their nursemaids as they gaze upward at the towering carriages, and, here and there, the porters of the Pullman Company themselves, men in immaculate white jackets and dark trousers, moving among the travellers with quiet efficiency, lifting trunks and hat boxes, offering directions, smoothing the way for every passenger with a grace that has been honed through years of patient service. The whistle of the locomotive sounds now, a long, low, melancholy note that rolls through the depot and echoes against the iron rafters, fading slowly into the gathering night beyond the great open archway at the platform's end. It is a sound that has no equal in the modern world, a sound that speaks of distance and departure and the long, slow unwinding of the continent beneath the wheels of a great machine. Somewhere far down the line, in a small prairie town not yet visible upon any map of memory, another whistle answers, faint and ghostly, like a lover calling across the dark. The conductor lifts his hand, signalling that the hour has come. Steam rises in a great soft cloud from the locomotive's flanks, rolling along the platform and curling around the ankles of the waiting passengers like a warm grey mist. And one by one, with measured grace, the travellers begin to step aboard, vanishing into the soft amber glow of the carriage interiors, where the journey of a lifetime is about to begin in earnest, beneath chandeliers that sway gently with the heartbeat of the rails. To step aboard a Pullman Palace car is to cross a threshold between two distinct worlds, and the moment one's foot leaves the worn planks of the platform and finds the polished brass of the carriage step, something fundamental shifts in the texture of the surrounding air. The first sensation is one of warmth, a gentle, enveloping warmth that drifts outward from the open vestibule like the breath of a sleeping cat curled by a hearth. This warmth carries upon it a complex tapestry of fragrances, each thread distinct yet woven seamlessly into the whole. There is the rich, buttery scent of beeswax polish, applied that very afternoon to every wooden surface within the car. There is the faint herbal perfume of dried lavender, tucked discreetly into linen cupboards to keep the bedding fresh. There is the soft trace of cedar from the storage compartments, and the warm, comforting note of pipe tobacco that lingers permanently in the upholstery, never overpowering, simply present, like the memory of a friendly conversation in a panelled library. The vestibule itself is a small antechamber of polished oak, no larger than a generous closet, yet appointed with a care that suggests the architects of the Pullman Company understood something profound about the human spirit. Here, before the traveller ever sees the interior of the carriage proper, every surface speaks of welcome. The floor is laid with a thick rubber matting, dark and silent beneath the foot, designed to absorb both sound and the dust of the platform. The walls are panelled in narrow strips of quarter-sawn oak, each strip selected for the particular pattern of its grain and finished with a hand-rubbed wax that gives the wood a soft, lustrous glow. A small brass coat hook gleams beside the inner doorway, its surface polished so thoroughly that one can see one's own reflection within it, distorted and golden, as though one were peering into a tiny private sunset. The inner doorway itself is a thing of considerable beauty, an arched portal of frosted glass set within a frame of deeply polished mahogany. Upon the glass, an artist has etched a delicate floral pattern, perhaps morning glories twining through a trellis, perhaps wild roses scattered along a winding vine, the precise design varying from car to car. Through this frosted glass, the warm amber light of the carriage interior glows softly, suggesting rather than revealing the wonders that lie beyond. A small brass handle, shaped like a curving leaf, invites the hand of the traveller, and the door swings inward with the smoothest of motions balanced upon hinges so finely machined that they make no sound at all. And now at last the carriage proper opens before the traveller, and the first true glimpse of Pullman luxury reveals itself in all its quiet splendour. The eye, accustomed to the greys and browns and soot-stained shadows of the depot platform, must take a long, slow moment to adjust to the rich palette of colour that flows through this enclosed world. Deep crimson velvet upholsters the long banquettes that line either side of the carriage, the fabric so densely woven that it seems to absorb the lamplight and release it again as a softer, warmer glow. The walls between the windows are panelled in burled walnut, the natural patterns of the grain swirling and flowing like the surface of a slow-moving river, each panel a unique work of natural artistry that no two human eyes will ever read in quite the same way. The ceiling, perhaps most remarkable of all, has been painted in a soft, creamy white and decorated with raised plasterwork mouldings that frame oval panels of hand-painted scenery. Within these oval panels, the unknown artists of the Pullman Company have rendered pastoral landscapes in delicate watercolour tones, scenes of distant lakes and quiet meadows and shepherds resting beneath spreading oaks. Scenes meant to soothe the eye of the traveller who happens to glance upward during a long afternoon of rail travel. The plaster moldings themselves have been painted with a pale gilt so that they seem to shimmer faintly when the lamps are lit at evening, lending the entire ceiling the appearance of a softly glowing canopy of cloud and gold. The lamps themselves deserve a moment of quiet attention, for they are among the most distinctive features of the Pullman experience. Each carriage is illuminated by a series of brass lanterns suspended from the ceiling at regular intervals, their glass globes etched with subtle floral patterns, their flames burning steadily within. The lamps have been engineered with such care that even the gentle swaying motion of the carriage cannot extinguish them, and their light fills the interior with a warm, golden glow that flatters every face and softens every shadow. As the carriage begins to move, these lamps will sway ever so slightly upon their brass chains, sending soft ripples of light across the polished surfaces of the woodwork, creating an effect not unlike the play of sunlight upon the surface of a quiet pond. The carpet underfoot is deep and rich, woven in an intricate pattern of crimson and gold and deepest forest green, the design borrowed from the great oriental rugs that were then so fashionable in the parlors of wealthy Americans. The pile of the carpet is so thick and dense that it absorbs nearly all sound from the footsteps of those who walk upon it, lending the carriage a quality of hushed reverence that feels almost ecclesiastical. Beneath the carpet, a layer of horsehair padding has been laid down to further soften the vibrations of the rails, and beneath this padding the floorboards themselves have been built of seasoned oak, fitted together with such precision that not a single creak betrays their presence even after years of constant travel. The windows along the length of the carriage are large and generously proportioned, framed in polished brass and fitted with double panes of heavy plate glass to insulate the interior against the temperature extremes of the American climate. Between the panes, a small space allows for ventilation through cleverly designed brass mechanisms that can be opened or closed by the turning of a small ornamental knob. Heavy curtains of crimson velvet, edged with golden tassels, hang at each window, and these curtains may be drawn closed during the heat of the day or opened wide to admit the soft moonlight of a prairie evening. The brass curtain rods themselves have been engraved with delicate floral motifs, and the rings that suspend the curtains are of solid brass, polished to a mirror finish. Between every other window, small ornamental brackets have been mounted upon the wall, each holding a slender vase of cut crystal and each vase containing a small, fresh bouquet of seasonal flowers. The Pullman porters refresh these flowers at every major station along the route, removing any wilted blossoms with discreet efficiency, and replacing them with fresh stems gathered from the depot greenhouses that the company maintains in every great city across the continent. Tonight, the bouquets contain late autumn chrysanthemums, their petals a soft gold tinged with bronze, their gentle fragrance adding yet another delicate thread to the tapestry of scents that fills this remarkable enclosed world. And so the traveller stands at last upon the threshold, gazing down the long, soft corridor of the Pullman Palace Car, where lamplight and velvet and polished wood combine to create a small, perfect world, suspended for a few precious hours between one great city and another, while the rails sing their endless lullaby beneath the wheels. To truly understand the Pullman Palace Car, one must pause and consider the deeper architecture of these remarkable vessels of travel, for they were not merely decorated railway cars, but rather feats of engineering wedded to artistry in a manner that had no precedent in the long history of transportation. Each carriage measured some 70 feet in length and 10 feet in width, dimensions that may seem modest by the standards of modern dwellings. Yet within these compact proportions, the Pullman engineers had managed to incorporate sleeping accommodations, dining facilities, lavatories, and elegant social spaces, all integrated with such cleverness that no element ever seemed to crowd another. The genius of the design lay not in any single feature, but in the way every component had been considered in relation to every other, creating a unified whole that breathed with its own internal harmony. The framework of the carriage itself was constructed primarily of seasoned oak and ash, woods chosen for their particular combinations of strength and flexibility. These timbers had been cut from forests in Michigan and Wisconsin, then transported to the great Pullman works in the company town that bore the founder's name, where they were aged for periods of 2 to 3 years before being deemed suitable for use in carriage construction. The aging process was considered essential by the master craftsmen of the Pullman shops, for green or improperly seasoned wood would warp and shift with the constant motion and temperature changes of cross-continental travel, eventually compromising the integrity of the entire car. Only timbers that had passed through these patient years of seasoning were judged worthy to bear the weight of the Pullman name. Beneath the floor of each carriage ran a complex network of iron springs and leather suspension straps, an arrangement that had been refined through decades of experimentation and represented the cutting edge of 19th century mechanical engineering. The springs themselves were forged in the Pullman ironworks, each one tested individually for its precise resistance and rebound, and each one numbered and matched to its mate so that the carriage would balance evenly upon the rails. The leather straps, cut from the finest oxhide and treated with neatsfoot oil to preserve their suppleness, served as a secondary cushioning system, absorbing the smaller vibrations that the iron springs allowed to pass through. The combined effect was a ride so smooth that travellers often remarked upon being able to balance a full glass of wine upon the dining table without spilling so much as a single drop, even as the carriage rolled through the rougher sections of mountain track in the high passes of the Sierra Nevada. The walls of the carriage were constructed in a manner that bordered upon the obsessive in its attention to detail. The outermost layer consisted of mahogany planking, each plank cut from the same tree to ensure consistency of color and grain, and joined together with hidden tongues and grooves so that no nail or screw was ever visible upon the exterior surface. Behind this outer layer lay a thick padding of horsehair felt, compressed and bonded to provide both insulation against temperature and a deadening effect upon sound. Behind the horsehair came another layer of thinner pine planking, and behind that the inner panelling of burled walnut or quarter-sawn oak that the passenger would see from within the carriage. This sandwich of materials, totaling some 4 inches in thickness, kept the interior at a comfortable temperature even when the carriage was crossing the snowbound prairies of Nebraska in midwinter, or the scorching deserts of Arizona at the height of summer. The roof of each carriage represented yet another marvel of engineering ingenuity, for it had been designed to admit the maximum possible amount of natural light while remaining completely watertight against the heaviest of rains. Raised central section, known among the Pullman craftsmen as the clerestory, ran the entire length of the carriage and was fitted with small rectangular windows of frosted or stained glass. These clerestory windows could be opened by means of a brass crank mechanism, allowing the warm air of summer to escape upward and outward, while at the same time they admitted gentle shafts of daylight that filtered downward into the interior of the carriage in soft, dappled patterns. Upon a sunny afternoon, the play of light through these clerestory windows created an atmosphere of remarkable beauty, with patches of pale gold drifting slowly across the carpet as the train moved through the changing landscape outside. The flooring of the carriage was constructed in a similarly thoughtful manner, with a base of heavy oak planks laid lengthwise along the carriage and tightly fitted together. Above this base lay a layer of asbestos sheeting intended to provide both fire protection and additional insulation, and above the asbestos came a layer of horsehair padding identical to that used within the walls. Only after these foundational layers had been carefully assembled did the Pullman carpet layers spread the great Oriental-style rugs that were the visible flooring of the carriage, their edges tucked precisely into the brass channels that ran along the base of every wall. The result was a floor that felt almost alive beneath the foot, yielding gently to each step, yet returning instantly to its smooth, level state, with no creak or groan ever betraying the layers of craftsmanship that lay beneath. Throughout the carriage, the ventilation system had been engineered with a sophistication that anticipated the great hotel architecture of a later generation. Small brass grills, intricately cast in floral patterns, were set into the upper portions of the walls at regular intervals. Behind these grills, hidden flues carried fresh air drawn from intake vents on the roof of the carriage, while corresponding outflow grills at floor level permitted the stale air to be drawn away. In winter, the incoming air could be warmed by passing it across a series of steam pipes connected to the locomotive's boiler, while in summer, Blocks of ice placed in special insulated chambers cooled the air to a refreshing temperature before it entered the passenger compartments. The travellers themselves rarely noticed this elaborate system, for it operated almost entirely in silence, but its effect upon their comfort was profound and continuous. The lighting system of the Pullman Palace Car had evolved through several generations during the company's history, beginning with simple oil lamps and progressing through whale oil, then kerosene, and eventually, in the more advanced cars of the 1880s, a remarkable arrangement involving compressed gas stored in heavy iron cylinders mounted beneath the floor of the carriage. This gas, drawn upward through hidden brass pipes, fed the elegant lanterns that hung from the ceiling, and could be regulated from a central control valve to provide either bright illumination for evening reading or a soft, dim glow suitable for the quiet hours of nighttime travel. The lanterns themselves were works of considerable artistry, their globes of frosted or etched glass scattering the gaslight in patterns of soft, lacy beauty across the polished surfaces of the carriage interior. Even the smallest fixtures of the Pullman Palace Car had been considered with the same patient attention to detail. The brass door handles were cast in moulds carved by skilled artisans in the Pullman shops, each handle bearing the subtle floral motif that served as a unifying decorative theme throughout the entire car. The hinges of every door and cabinet had been machined to such close tolerances that they swung and closed without sound. The screws that held the woodwork together had been driven so that their slots all aligned in the same direction, a small detail that no casual passenger would ever notice, yet one that bespoke the philosophy of the Pullman craftsman, who held that true luxury lay not in the obvious displays of wealth, but in the thousand small perfections that combined invisibly and silently to create an experience of seamless and continuous comfort. Beyond the main passenger corridor, set apart by a graceful sliding door of carved walnut, lies one of the most exquisite spaces aboard the Pullman Palace Car, a chamber known to the privileged few as the drawing room, though some travellers preferred to call it simply the parlour. It is a small space, perhaps 10 feet square, yet within its modest dimensions the architects of the Pullman Company have managed to evoke the atmosphere of a private salon in some great country house, the kind of room where one might find a poet at the window or a philosopher beside the fire, lost in contemplation of some delicate question of the soul. As we enter, the door closes behind us with the softest of clicks, and the murmur of the corridor fades away, replaced by a hushed, intimate quiet that seems to belong to another century altogether. The walls of the drawing room have been panelled in a wood so dark and richly figured that it seems almost black at first glance, yet upon closer inspection reveals itself to be a deep, warm rosewood. Its surface shot through with veins of darker grain that flow and curl like ink dropped into still water. Each panel has been hand-rubbed with a mixture of beeswax and turpentine applied in thin layers over the course of many days until the wood took on a depth of lustre that seems almost liquid, as though one could plunge one's hand into the surface and feel the warmth of some inner glow. Above the wainscoting, the walls have been covered with a wallpaper of pale gold, decorated with a delicate pattern of climbing wisteria, the lavender blossoms rendered in such fine detail that one can almost smell their faint sweet perfume drifting through the still air. The drawing room is furnished with 2 facing settees, each upholstered in a heavy silk damask of deep emerald green, fabric woven in a pattern of intertwining vines and leaves that catches the lamplight and gives off subtle shimmerings of darker and lighter green as the carriage sways gently upon the rails. The settees themselves are framed in carved walnut, the backs and arms shaped into elegant scrollwork that mimics the curling tendrils of the damask pattern, creating a harmony between the upholstery and its supporting structure that few passengers would consciously recognize, yet all would feel as a kind of visual rightness, a sense that everything within this room had been chosen with patient care to belong with everything else. Between the settees stands a low table of polished walnut, its top inlaid with a circular medallion of mother of pearl, the iridescent surface catching the lamplight in soft pinks and blues and silvery greys. Upon the table rests a small silver tray, and upon the tray a tea service of the finest porcelain, each piece edged in delicate gold and decorated with hand-painted scenes of pastoral idylls. The teapot is a graceful curved vessel with a swan neck spout, the handle wound with a band of woven silver wire to insulate the fingers from the heat. Two small cups, each no larger than a child's hand, sit upon their matched saucers, awaiting the moment when the porter shall arrive with the warmed pot and pour out the fragrant amber liquid for whichever travellers have chosen to retreat to this private sanctuary. Small silver creamer and sugar bowl complete the service, and beside them rests a tiny pair of silver tongs for the lifting of the sugar lumps, their handles shaped into delicate twining ivy leaves. The single window of the drawing room has been fitted with curtains of heavier silk than those found in the main corridor, a deep forest green that nearly matches the upholstery of the settees, and these curtains may be drawn closed by means of a slender silken cord that passes through a small ornamental ring upon the wall. When drawn, the curtains create a sense of profound privacy, as though the entire drawing room had been lifted out of the train altogether and set down in some quiet corner of a Boston townhouse, far from the rumble of wheels and the whistle of the locomotive. When opened, however, the window reveals a generous view of the passing landscape, framed in such a way that the eye is naturally drawn outwards to the long horizons of the American countryside. A small writing desk has been built into one corner of the drawing room, its surface of polished cherry wood inlaid with thin strips of ebony in a pattern of fine geometric precision. The desk is fitted with a hinged top that opens to reveal a writing surface of dark green leather edged in gold tooling and a small compartment containing fresh sheets of cream-coloured stationery embossed with the elegant Pullman crest. Beside the stationery rests a silver inkwell with a hinged lid and a slender pen of black lacquer with a nib of pure gold. Many a traveller, in the quiet hours of an evening journey, has paused at this small desk to write a letter to a beloved family member or distant friend, the gentle motion of the carriage somehow easing the flow of words from the heart through the pen and onto the page. In the corner opposite the writing desk stands a small bookcase, its shelves filled with carefully selected volumes intended to entertain and inform the discerning passenger. Upon the upper shelf one might find slender volumes of poetry by Longfellow and Whittier and Tennyson, their covers bound in soft green leather and stamped in gold. The middle shelf holds a selection of novels suitable for genteel reading, perhaps the latest works of William Dean Howells or the gentle tales of Sarah Orne Jewett. The lower shelf is devoted to practical guides, illustrated descriptions of the great American landscapes through which the train will pass, with engraved plates depicting the wonders of Niagara Falls, the canyons of the Colorado, and the vast forests of the Pacific Northwest. The books have been chosen. The Pullman Company assures its passengers with the express intention of enhancing the educational and aesthetic dimensions of the rail journey. Above the bookcase hangs a small oval mirror in a frame of carved giltwood, the mirror itself slightly tarnished at the edges with that beautiful patina that only authentic age can bestow. Beside the mirror, mounted upon the wall, is a single brass sconce holding a candle of pure beeswax, ready to be lit during those rare moments when the gas lamps are dimmed for the evening hours. The flickering candle, when illuminated, casts soft moving shadows across the rosewood panelling, lending the drawing room an atmosphere of almost medieval intimacy. A sense of being enclosed within a small warm circle of light while the vast night world rolls past beyond the curtained window. The carpet underfoot is even thicker and more luxurious than that of the main corridor, woven in a pattern of muted greens and golds with accents of deep maroon, the design borrowed from the great Persian rugs that had become the height of fashion in the wealthy parlours of New York and Boston. The pile is so dense that one's footsteps make no sound whatsoever, and one has the curious sensation of moving across a soft cloud, a sensation that contributes greatly to the dreamlike quality of any visit to this remarkable little chamber. In the very centre of the ceiling, a small chandelier of cut crystal hangs suspended from a brass chain, its prisms catching the gaslight and scattering it in tiny rainbows across the rosewood walls. The chandelier sways ever so gently with the motion of the carriage, and the rainbow lights drift slowly across the room like the play of sunlight upon the surface of a quiet stream, creating an effect so soothing that travellers have been known to sit silently for hours, simply watching the soft dance of color upon the dark, polished walls. Now let us turn our quiet attention to the long central corridor that runs the entire length of the sleeping car, for this passageway is itself a place of considerable wonder, kind of narrow gallery that connects the various private compartments and serves as the principal artery through which the gentle commerce of evening life flows during the long hours of nighttime travel. The corridor extends some 60 feet from end to end, its width perhaps 3 feet at most, and yet within these narrow proportions the Pullman designers have created an experience of remarkable depth and atmosphere, an environment that rewards the slow, contemplative passage of the traveler with countless small revelations of beauty and craftsmanship. The walls of the corridor are panelled in vertical strips of quarter-sawn white oak, each strip approximately 4 inches in width. The natural figure of the wood selected so that the patterns of the grain create a subtle undulating rhythm as one walks the length of the passage. The wood has been finished in a hand-rubbed amber varnish that warms its tone toward a soft honey color, and the surface has been polished to such a smooth perfection that one can run one's hand along it as one walks, feeling the gentle vibration of the rails transmitted through the wood, like the pulse of the great machine carrying us through the dark prairies. At regular intervals, the vertical strips are interrupted by narrow horizontal bands of darker wood, perhaps black walnut or deeply stained mahogany, which serve to break the visual monotony and lend the corridor a sense of architectural rhythm. The ceiling of the corridor is somewhat lower than that of the drawing room or the open passenger compartments, and this lowered ceiling has been used to advantage by the designers, who have covered it with an embossed wallpaper of cream and gold, the pattern depicting twining laurel branches with small clusters of golden berries scattered throughout. The wallpaper has been applied with such care that the seams between sections are invisible, and the gentle sheen of the gold leaf creates an effect of soft luminosity even when the lamps are dimmed for the late evening hours. Where the ceiling meets the walls, an ornamental moulding of carved oak runs the length of the corridor, painted in a subtle gilt that picks up the gold of the wallpaper above and creates a unified frame for the entire ceiling. The floor of the corridor is covered with a runner carpet of remarkable beauty, a long, narrow rug, woven specifically for use in railway cars and chosen by the Pullman designers for its combination of practical durability and aesthetic refinement. The pattern is a complex arrangement of geometric medallions in deep crimson, midnight blue, and burnished gold, the design echoing the classical motifs of ancient Greek and Roman art that were so fashionable among American decorators of the late 19th century. The pile of the carpet is firm yet yielding, designed to withstand the constant passage of porters and travelers without showing wear, while still providing a soft surface that absorbs the sound of footsteps and contributes to the overall hushed atmosphere of the sleeping car. Along one side of the corridor, the doors of the private compartments stand at regular intervals, each door a work of cabinetry that would not be out of place in a fine private home. The doors are made of solid mahogany, panelled in a classical style with rectangular fields surrounded by raised mouldings and finished with a deep red-brown stain that complements the lighter oak of the corridor walls. Each door bears a small brass plate engraved with a number, the numerals rendered in a graceful italic script, and beside each door is mounted a tiny brass card holder containing a slip of paper upon which has been written the name of the compartment's current occupant, that the porter may know at a glance which traveller is to be found within. The handles of these compartment doors deserve a moment of special attention, for they are among the most elegant fixtures aboard the entire car. Each handle has been cast in solid brass and shaped in the form of a curving olive branch, the small leaves rendered in such fine detail that one can count the individual veins upon each leaf surface. The brass has been polished to a high mirror finish, and a small lock mechanism, operated by a tiny brass key carried by the porter, allows the compartment to be secured during the absence of its occupant. Above each door, a small brass-rimmed glass panel admits a thin shaft of light from the corridor lamps into the compartment beyond, providing a soft illumination during the night without disturbing the sleeping traveller. Opposite the row of compartment doors, the wall of the corridor is interrupted at regular intervals by tall windows fitted with curtains of heavy crimson velvet. These windows look outward upon the passing landscape, and during the daytime they provide constant entertainment for the strolling traveler, each window framing a different view of the vast American countryside as it unfolds at the steady pace of 40 miles per hour. At night, however, the windows become mirrors of a sort, reflecting back the warm interior of the corridor in a soft, slightly distorted image, while occasionally allowing a glimpse of distant lights from a passing town, or the cold silver of moonlight upon a frozen prairie. The velvet curtains may be drawn closed by means of a small brass cord with a tassel of gold thread, and many travelers prefer to leave the curtains drawn during the night, that they may walk the corridor without the distraction of dark windows reflecting their passage. Between the windows mounted upon the walls of the corridor hang a series of small framed prints depicting scenes from the great national parks of the American West. These engravings, executed by skilled artists of the period, show such wonders as the geysers of Yellowstone, the granite walls of Yosemite, and the painted desert of the Colorado Plateau. Each engraving has been framed in a simple but elegant gilt frame, and beneath each, a small brass plate identifies the scene depicted. The Pullman Company commissioned these engravings as a way of educating travelers about the geographical wonders that lay along the routes of the great transcontinental lines, encouraging them to plan future journeys to these distant marvels and thereby ensuring continued patronage of the Pullman cars. At regular intervals along the corridor, small brass sconces have been mounted upon the walls, each holding a single gas jet protected by an etched glass shade. These sconces provide the principal illumination of the corridor during the evening and nighttime hours, and the soft amber light they cast falls upon the polished oak walls and the rich crimson runner carpet in a manner that creates an atmosphere of profound, almost reverential calm. The light is bright enough that one may read the numbers upon the compartment doors and walk safely the length of the passage, yet dim enough that it does not disturb the sleeping travellers behind the closed doors, nor does it diminish the sense of restful intimacy that pervades the corridor during the late hours of the journey. The far end of the corridor opens through another sliding door of frosted glass into the small vestibule that connects this carriage to the next car of the train, a space we shall have occasion to explore in due course. Just before this terminal door, however, there stands a small upholstered bench against one wall, intended for the use of any traveller who might wish to pause in their journey along the corridor and rest for a moment in quiet contemplation. The bench is covered in the same crimson velvet as the curtains, its frame carved in the same style as the settees of the drawing-room, and beside it stands a small brass spittoon for the use of gentlemen who may be enjoying a pipe or cigar during their stroll through the carriage. Above the bench hangs a small framed map of the railway route, with the cities and towns along the line clearly marked, allowing the traveller to consult the geography of their journey at any moment, and to know with certainty how far they have come and how far they have yet to travel before arriving at their distant destination. As the locomotive carries us deeper into the gathering night, the rhythms of life aboard the Pullman Palace Car begin to shift and soften in accordance with ancient patterns of human living, patterns that the wise designers of the Pullman Company had observed and codified into the very fabric of their service. There is a gentle ceremony to the evening hours aboard these travelling palaces, a sequence of small rituals that unfold in their proper order, each one preparing the traveller for the deeper rest that awaits in the small hours of the night. These rituals were performed by the porters and stewards with such unhurried grace that few passengers ever consciously noticed their structure, and yet the cumulative effect upon the comfort and contentment of the traveller was profound and continuous. The first of these evening rituals begins with the soft chime of a small silver bell, sounded gently by the head porter as he walks slowly through the carriage at the appointed hour. The bell is no larger than a teacup suspended from a slender wooden handle, and its tone is high and clear like the distant call of a wood thrush at twilight. This bell announces the beginning of the dinner service in the dining car, and it is the signal for those passengers who have chosen to dine upon the train to rise from their afternoon repose and prepare themselves for the journey through the corridors to the dining carriage. The porter pauses briefly at each compartment door, sounding the bell with a single gentle stroke, and then continues onward, his polished shoes making no sound upon the thick crimson runner. In the privacy of their compartments, the travelling ladies and gentlemen attend to the small ceremonies of evening dress with the same care they would devote to such matters in their own homes. Gentleman might exchange his travelling coat for a more formal frock coat of darker fabric, smooth his hair before the small mirror mounted upon the wall of his compartment, and adjust the watch chain that crosses his waistcoat. Lady, with the assistance of her maid or of one of the female attendants provided by the Pullman Company, might change from her daytime travelling dress into an evening gown of softer and more elegant fabric, perhaps a dress of midnight silk trimmed with lace, a gown of dove-grey velvet with delicate embroidery at the throat and wrists. She might pin a small flower into her hair, perhaps a white rose taken from the bouquet upon her bedside table, and apply a touch of perfume from the small crystal vial in her travelling case. The atmosphere within these private compartments during the evening dressing hour is one of intimate quiet, broken only by the soft rustle of fabric, the gentle clink of small silver objects, the whispered conversations between travelling companions, and always, beneath everything else, the steady rhythm of the rails passing beneath the wheels. The compartments themselves are remarkably well insulated from the sounds of the corridor and the neighbouring compartments, a result of the layered walls and thick carpeting that the Pullman engineers have installed throughout the carriage, tanned so each traveller has the curious sensation of preparing for dinner in a tiny movable hotel room, complete in every detail and entirely private despite being but one of many similar chambers strung along the length of the train. When the dressing is complete, the travellers emerge into the corridor in small groups of 2 and 3, the gentlemen offering their arms to the ladies, conversations beginning in low murmurs as old acquaintances greet one another and new acquaintances exchange polite introductions. There is a gentle hierarchy to this evening progression, with the wealthier and more distinguished travellers tending to dine earlier in the service, while those of more modest means follow at a slightly later hour. The Pullman porters and stewards observe this hierarchy with delicate tact, never explicitly enforcing any order of precedence, yet somehow ensuring that each party of travellers finds itself proceeding to the dining car at exactly the proper moment for its comfort and dignity. The walk from the sleeping car to the dining car is itself a small adventure, particularly for those passengers who have not previously experienced the connecting passages between Pullman cars. Each carriage of the train is connected to its neighbours by a vestibule passage, an enclosed bridge with concertina-folded leather walls that flex and bend with the motion of the train as it travels through curves and over uneven track. To pass from one carriage to another requires the traveller to step across a small gap between the cars where the motion of the train is most acutely felt, and where one may sometimes glimpse through a small window in the vestibule wall the dark blur of the railroad ties passing beneath the train at impossible speed. Most travellers find this brief crossing to be exhilarating rather than alarming, a small reminder of the great mechanical marvel that is carrying them through the night. The dining car itself, when one finally arrives, presents a sight of such elegance that even seasoned travellers often pause for a moment upon the threshold to take in the full effect. Long white linen tablecloths cover the rows of small tables that line either side of the carriage, each table set for either 2 or 4 diners, with arrangements of remarkable beauty. The china is the finest porcelain edged in cobalt blue and gold, bearing the discreet monogram of the Pullman Company. The crystal goblets, each one cut with a delicate pattern of grape leaves around the bowl, sparkle in the light of the silver candelabras that grace the centre of every table. The silverware, polished to a high shine, has been laid out according to the strictest principles of formal dining, with the proper arrangement of forks, knives, and spoons for each course of the elaborate meal that is about to be served. The waiters of the dining car, distinct in their own livery from the porters of the sleeping cars, move among the tables with a grace that has been honed through years of practice. They wear short white jackets with black bow ties, and their movements are characterized by a particular economy and precision, born of the necessity of carrying full plates and brimming glasses across a moving floor without spilling so much as a single drop. The chief steward of the dining car, a man of considerable dignity and many years of service, greets each party of arriving diners at the entrance, escorts them to their assigned table, and ensures that they are properly seated before signalling to the waiters that the service may begin. The menu offered upon the Pullman dining cars was justly famous throughout the country, and indeed throughout the wider world of luxury travel. Typical evening dinner might begin with a soup course, perhaps a delicate consommé of beef enriched with vegetables, or a creamy chowder of fresh oysters obtained that very morning from the markets of whatever great coastal city the train had most recently departed. The fish course might offer brook trout from the Adirondack streams, or fresh sea bass from the Atlantic, prepared with butter and lemon and accompanied by a small portion of boiled new potatoes. The main course presented a choice of meats, perhaps a roast prime rib of beef or a saddle of lamb, or breast of duck with cherry sauce, each accompanied by appropriate vegetables and sauces of considerable refinement. The wine service deserves particular mention, for the Pullman Company maintained extensive cellars in each of its major terminus cities, and the wines selected for each route were chosen with care to complement both the menu and the geographical character of the journey. A train traveling across the great wheat-growing plains of the Midwest might offer wines from the small but excellent wineries of Ohio and Missouri, while a train bound for California would feature the increasingly impressive vintages of the Napa and Sonoma valleys, then just beginning to emerge as serious rivals to the great wine regions of Europe. The wine steward, a man of considerable expertise, would visit each table during the meal to discuss the wine selections with the diners, recommending pairings with the various courses and ensuring that every glass remained appropriately filled throughout the long, leisurely progression of the evening meal. No discussion of the Pullman Palace Car experience would be complete without a careful and respectful consideration of the men who served as porters aboard these magnificent travelling palaces, for it was their patient, skilled, and largely invisible labour that transformed the ingenious mechanical creations of the Pullman shops into living vessels of hospitality and grace. The Pullman porters were among the most highly trained service professionals in the world during the late 19th century, and the standards to which they were held by their employer were exacting in the extreme, encompassing matters of personal appearance, manner of speech, technical skill, and discretion of conduct, all of which combined to create the seamless atmosphere of luxury that made the Pullman name a byword for excellence in travel throughout the civilized world. The porters were drawn predominantly from among African-American men, many of them sons or grandsons of those who had been emancipated during the great national struggle of the 1860s, and the position of Pullman porter, despite its considerable hardships and inequities, came to be regarded within the African-American community as one of the most respected and stable forms of employment available during this period of American history. The Pullman Company recruited its porters with great care, seeking men of dignified bearing, calm temperament, considerable intelligence, and the patience to endure the long hours and difficult conditions that the work entailed. Once selected, these men underwent extensive training in every aspect of their duties, training that often lasted several months before a new porter was permitted to serve unsupervised aboard a Pullman car. The training of a Pullman porter encompassed an astonishing range of skills and knowledge. He was required to memorize the layout of every variety of Pullman car in service, that he might find his way without hesitation through the darkness during the night hours, when his lantern alone provided illumination. He learned the proper methods of making up sleeping berths, a complex procedure involving the careful arrangement of mattresses, sheets, blankets, and pillows in such a manner that the passenger would find every comfort upon retiring and every convenience upon awakening. He studied the techniques of cleaning and polishing the various surfaces of the carriage, knowing precisely which polish to use upon brass, which upon mahogany, which upon silver, and which upon the delicate frosted glass of the lampshades. He memorized the schedules of every train upon every route, that he might inform passengers of arrival and departure times, of connecting trains, and of the various sites of interest that lay along the way. Beyond these technical matters, the Pullman porter was trained in the more subtle arts of personal service, those refinements of manner and address that distinguished his work from the rougher service offered upon less exalted railway lines. He learned to walk without making a sound upon the carpeted corridors, to open and close doors without the slightest noise, to enter a passenger's compartment with a soft knock and a quiet word of identification, to anticipate the needs of his charges before they were spoken, and to perform countless small kindnesses without ever drawing attention to his own role in providing them. The ideal Pullman porter, according to the company's training manuals, was a man whose presence was felt throughout the carriage as a kind of benign spirit, attending to every comfort yet remaining, always discreetly in the background, never intrusive, never effusive, never anything but quietly competent and respectfully attentive. The uniform of the Pullman porter was itself a work of considerable formal beauty, designed to convey both the dignity of the position and the institutional identity of the Pullman Company. The standard porter's uniform consisted of a long jacket of dark blue serge, single-breasted with a row of polished brass buttons down the front, each button stamped with the elegant Pullman crest. Beneath the jacket, a white shirt of crisp cotton, freshly laundered each morning by the laundry car attendants, was worn with a black bow tie of silk. Dark trousers of the same blue serge as the jacket completed the basic uniform, and these were always pressed with a sharp crease that ran precisely down the front of each leg. The porter's shoes were of polished black leather, kept always at the highest gloss, and his cap was of the same blue serge as the rest of the uniform, with a stiff black brim and the Pullman insignia in gold above the band. Upon his arrival at the start of each journey, the porter would carefully inspect his uniform to ensure that every detail was perfect, for he understood that he served as a visible representative of the entire Pullman enterprise, and that any flaw in his appearance would reflect not only upon himself but upon the institution he served. He would polish his shoes one final time, brush any lingering dust from his jacket, ensure that his cap was set at precisely the correct angle, and only then would he consider himself ready to greet the first arriving passengers at the platform. Throughout the journey, he would maintain this standard of impeccable appearance, retreating periodically to his small staff compartment to brush, polish, or adjust as the needs of the day required. The work of the porter aboard the moving train was nearly continuous, beginning before the first passenger boarded and continuing well after the last had departed at the terminal station. In the early hours of the journey, the porter assisted with the loading of luggage, escorting each passenger to the appropriate compartment, ensuring that trunks and suitcases were properly stowed in the overhead racks or the underseat storage, and pointing out the various features of the compartment to passengers who might be unfamiliar with the Pullman accommodations. He would offer a glass of cool water to each new arrival, take orders for any refreshments that might be desired, and inquire whether the temperature of the compartment was satisfactory or whether adjustments to the heating or ventilation system might be required. As the journey progressed through the daytime hours, the porter remained constantly available for the various small services that travellers might require. He would polish shoes left outside compartment doors during the night, returning them to their proper places before the morning awakening of their owners. He would fetch newspapers and magazines from the small library kept in his service compartment. He would brush the dust from gentlemen's hats and ladies' travelling cloaks. He would dispatch telegrams from the major stations along the route, carrying the messages to the depot telegraph office during the brief stops, and ensuring that any replies were delivered to their recipients with discreet promptness. He would attend to children with special care, providing small games and amusements to occupy them during the long hours when the scenery outside the window grew monotonous and the patience of young travellers wore thin. Perhaps the most demanding portion of the porter's daily labour came in the late evening hours, when the passenger compartments must be transformed from their daytime configurations of seats and tables into their nighttime configurations of made-up sleeping berths. This transformation, performed quickly and quietly by the porter, required considerable physical dexterity and a thorough understanding of the ingenious mechanisms by which Pullman cars converted from one form to another. The porter would lower the upper berths from their daytime stowage above the windows, fold the seat cushions into the lower berths, retrieve fresh sheets and blankets from the linen storage compartment, and make up each berth with the precision of a hospital nurse, ensuring that every fold and tuck was perfect, every pillow appropriately fluffed, every curtain properly drawn for the privacy of the sleeping passenger. The porter's own rest during the night hours was brief and frequently interrupted, for he must remain alert to the calls of any passenger who might require service, and he must perform regular patrols of the corridor to ensure that all was well. He would catch what sleep he could in his small staff compartment, often dozing in his uniform, ready to spring up at the first ring of the call bell from any passenger compartment. The Pullman Company assigned only one porter to each car under most conditions, and so he bore the entire weight of nighttime service alone, a responsibility that demanded both physical stamina and a remarkable depth of patient dedication. Through it all, the porter maintained his quiet dignity, his cheerful demeanor, his unfailing courtesy, transforming the long nights of cross-continental travel into experiences of seamless comfort for the sleeping passengers who relied upon his unseen labor. There comes, in the slow procession of the Pullman journey, a moment of particular and almost magical beauty, and that moment arrives in the soft grey hour just before true dawn, when the night has not quite ended and the day has not quite begun, and the sleeping car drifts through the prairie darkness like a lantern carried by some enormous patient hand. In this hour, the chandeliers of the corridor have been dimmed to their lowest setting, casting only the faintest amber glow across the polished oak walls and the deep crimson runner carpet. The compartment doors are closed, their small brass numbers gleaming softly in the half-light. Behind those doors, in the velvet privacy of their berths, the travellers slumber on, rocked by the steady rhythm of the rails, dreaming whatever dreams the deep prairie night may send into their resting minds. The first sign of approaching dawn comes not as a sudden brightness, but as the merest suggestion of a pale luminescence at the horizon, visible only to those who happen to be awake and gazing eastward through the corridor windows. This light begins as the faintest pearl grey, scarcely distinguishable from the dark sky around it, yet it spreads gradually across the eastern horizon, deepening from grey toward palest silver, then toward a soft rose, then toward the warmer tones of approaching morning. The transformation occurs so slowly that one cannot quite catch the moment of change, yet within the space of perhaps half an hour, the entire eastern sky has shifted from absolute night to a delicate canvas of pre-dawn colour, and the great curve of the prairie, hidden a moment ago in deepest shadow, begins to reveal itself in soft outline beyond the rolling windows of the train. The frosted glass of the corridor windows transforms this slow arrival of dawn into a kind of muted, dreamlike spectacle, for the light passes through the etched patterns of the glass and emerges within the corridor as soft, diffused glow rather than direct illumination. The pearl-grey light of pre-dawn becomes, within the corridor, a barely perceptible lifting of the darkness, a slight thinning of the shadows that lie pooled in the corners and along the lower edges of the walls. As the eastern light strengthens toward rose and gold, this same soft glow within the corridor warms by degrees until the polished surfaces of the oak panelling begin to catch the faintest pink reflections, and the brass fittings of the lamp sconces start to gleam with a delicate amber luster. The patterns etched upon the frosted glass deserve careful contemplation in this slow morning hour, for they have been designed with a sensitivity to precisely this effect of dawn light filtering through their surfaces. Some windows bear patterns of flowing vines and leaves, the shapes traced into the glass with such fine precision that one can see the individual veins upon each leaf when the light strikes the glass at the proper angle. Other windows feature geometric arrangements of interlocking circles and stars, designs borrowed from the great traditions of medieval European glass-making and adapted to the practical needs of the railway carriage. Still other windows depict small landscape scenes, perhaps a tiny sailboat upon a frosted lake, or a delicate spray of pine branches against a starless sky. As the dawn light strengthens, these designs come gradually into clearer view, their patterns slowly emerging from the darkness like memories rising to consciousness from the depths of dreams. The first true ray of sunlight, when it finally crests the horizon, enters the carriage through one of the broader corridor windows and falls in a golden bar across the crimson runner carpet, shapes distorted by the etched pattern of the glass into a strange and beautiful confusion of bright and dim sections that shift and ripple as the train sways gently upon the rails. This first golden bar of light catches the swirling dust motes that drift always in the still air of the corridor, and these tiny particles suddenly become visible as countless miniature constellations drifting and dancing within the beam of sunlight, their slow movements speaking of currents and eddies in the air, that the human eye could not otherwise perceive. To watch these dust motes in the morning sun is to be granted a small vision of the unseen architecture of air itself, the invisible patterns by which the breath of the world organizes its constant slow motion. Within the private compartments, the arrival of dawn announces itself by more subtle means. The heavy curtains that cover the compartment windows allow only a faint diffusion of the growing light to enter, and this light gathers in the upper corners of the compartment first, then spreads slowly downward as the sun rises higher above the prairie horizon. The sleeping traveller, still wrapped in the warm cocoon of the made-up berth, may stir slightly at this first dim awareness of the coming day, turning beneath the heavy blankets, settling deeper into the pillow, perhaps prolonging the precious final moments of slumber for as long as possible before the world calls them back to wakefulness. Some travellers prefer to rise with the dawn, opening their compartment curtains and watching the prairie come alive in the rosy light of morning. Others prefer to draw the curtains tighter, extending the night within their small private space until the porter's gentle knock announces that the breakfast service has begun. The porter himself has been awake for some time before the dawn, having risen at the appointed hour to prepare for the morning duties of his position. He has changed into a fresh uniform, polished his shoes, brushed his cap, and inspected his appearance in the small mirror of his service compartment. He has begun the careful work of preparing the carriage for the day, gathering the shoes that have been left outside the compartment doors during the night, and beginning the patient labour of polishing each pair before returning them to its proper place. He has dusted the lampshades with a soft cloth, polished the brass fittings of the corridor with a special preparation of his own devising, and checked the supplies of fresh towels and toilet articles in the lavatory compartment at the end of the carriage. By the time the first passengers begin to stir in their compartments, the porter has the entire carriage in a state of pristine readiness for the new day. The transformation of the corridor from its nighttime hush to its daytime liveliness occurs gradually over the course of perhaps an hour. The first sound to break the morning silence is usually the soft creak of a compartment door being opened and the quiet greeting exchanged between the porter and the early rising traveller. Soon another door opens and another, and the gentle murmur of morning conversation begins to flow through the carriage, accompanied by the soft padding of slippered feet upon the runner carpet as travellers make their way to the lavatory or to the dining car. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee begins to drift through the corridors from the dining car kitchen, mingling with the lingering perfume of the night's beeswax polish and the faint sweetness of the fresh flowers that the porter has placed in their bracket vases between the windows. By the time the sun has risen fully above the eastern horizon, the carriage has come alive with the cheerful bustle of morning activity. Yet even this bustle is conducted at a pace and volume in keeping with the dignity of the Pullman experience. There is no rushing, no shouting, no jarring noise. The passengers move at a measured pace, their conversations conducted in tones of quiet civility, their morning toilettes performed with care and patience. The porters and stewards move among them with the same unhurried grace that has characterized their work throughout the journey, and the entire carriage seems to breathe with the slow, steady rhythm of a community of refined travellers settling into another day of their leisurely progression across the great American continent. Outside the windows, the prairie has been transformed by the morning light into a vast tapestry of subtle colours. The grasses, which had appeared merely as dark masses during the night, now reveal themselves as a complex weaving of greens and golds and browns, with occasional patches of wild flowers visible as splashes of more vivid colour. Small streams catch the morning sun and gleam like silver ribbons drawn across the landscape. Distant farmhouses send up thin columns of smoke from their breakfast fires. Cattle graze peacefully in the gentle morning light, looking up briefly as the train passes and then returning to their patient business of the new day. The world, like the carriage itself, is settling into the steady rhythms of its waking hours. The dining car in the early morning hours possesses a quality of light and atmosphere quite distinct from that which fills it during the dinner service of the previous evening, and this morning atmosphere has its own particular charm, its own quiet rituals, own small rewards for the traveller who chooses to participate in the ceremony of breakfast aboard a Pullman train. The eastern sun, rising higher now above the prairie horizon, pours through the long row of windows along the eastern side of the dining car, filling the entire space with a warm golden light that catches the polished silverware, the cut crystal goblets, and the freshly pressed white linens, transforming the dining car into something resembling a bright conservatory or a sun-drenched terrace at some elegant country hotel. The white linen tablecloths have been replaced during the night with fresh ones, crisper and more pristine than even those of the dinner service, their surfaces ironed to such smoothness that they seem almost like sheets of soft white marble. Small vases of fresh flowers have appeared upon each table, the porters and stewards having gathered these blossoms during the brief nighttime stops at depot greenhouses along the route. This morning the vases hold sprays of yellow daffodils and small white lilies, their gentle perfume mingling with the rich aromas of breakfast preparation that drift forward from the kitchen at the rear of the car. The fragrance of brewing coffee, deep and warm and complex, forms the foundation of the breakfast atmosphere, while above this base note rise the lighter scents of fresh bread, sweet cream, sizzling bacon, and the subtle sweetness of pancake batter being prepared upon the kitchen griddle. The chief steward of the dining car, the same dignified gentleman who presided over the previous evening's dinner service, now stands at the entrance to the dining car in his morning uniform. Slightly less formal arrangement than his evening dress, but still impeccable in its precision and elegance. He greets each arriving party of breakfast diners with a warm smile and a quiet word of welcome, escorting them to their tables with the same unhurried grace that has characterized his work throughout the journey. He inquires whether the night has passed comfortably, expresses his hope that the sleep has been restorative, and offers his recommendations for the morning meal based upon the freshest provisions that have been loaded aboard at the most recent station stop. The Pullman breakfast menu was designed to accommodate the varied tastes and constitutions of travelers from every region of the country, and from the major nations of Europe as well, for these elegant trains carried distinguished visitors from London, Paris, Vienna, and Berlin who might find an entirely Americanized breakfast disconcerting to their continental sensibilities. Traveler might begin the meal with a small glass of fresh fruit juice, perhaps orange juice from the citrus groves of Florida or California, served in a small crystal goblet chilled by the dining car's refrigeration system. This might be followed by a course of fresh fruit, perhaps a half grapefruit prepared with sugar and a small silver spoon, or a bowl of strawberries with cream, or a selection of melon slices arranged upon a chilled plate. The principal breakfast offerings included a remarkable variety of preparations involving fresh eggs, those staples of the American morning meal that had been loaded aboard the train at every major station along the route. A guest might order eggs prepared in any conceivable manner, from a simple soft-boiled egg served in a delicate porcelain egg cup, to an elaborate omelette folded around fresh garden herbs and a small portion of grated cheese, to poached eggs upon toast with hollandaise sauce, scrambled eggs with diced ham and bell peppers in the manner that would later come to be called Western. The dining car's kitchen maintained an extensive supply of fresh eggs, taken from farms along the route and stored in cool compartments to ensure their absolute freshness, for the chief cook of the dining car held strong opinions about the importance of egg quality to the success of any breakfast meal. Beyond the egg preparations, the breakfast menu offered a generous selection of breakfast meats, including thick slices of country ham cured in the traditional manner of Virginia and Kentucky, slices of bacon cut from finest pork bellies and slow-smoked over hickory wood, sausage patties prepared from the dining car's own recipe of seasoned pork and herbs, and small lamb chops for those travelers whose tastes ran in that direction. Each meat was prepared to the precise specifications requested by the diner, the chief cook prizing his ability to achieve exactly the degree of crispness or tenderness that each guest desired, to never offering anything less than the most carefully prepared rendering of even the simplest breakfast item. The bread service at breakfast was justly famous, and often singled out for praise in the letters that satisfied travellers wrote to the Pullman Company headquarters. The dining car maintained its own small bakery, operated through the night by a baker who specialized in producing the variety of fresh bread products that would be required for the morning meal. From his small oven came golden loaves of white bread, dark loaves of pumpernickel, twisted braids of egg challah for those Jewish travelers who observed the dietary traditions of their faith, soft rolls of dinner roll style, biscuits prepared in the southern manner with buttermilk and lard, English muffins ready for the toaster, and croissants made in the French style, with countless layers of butter folded into the dough through hours of patient labor. The accompaniments to the bread service were equally varied and refined, small porcelain dishes of sweet butter, churned that very morning in the dairy car, sat upon every table, kept cool by means of small ice chips placed in shallow trays beneath them. Crystal jars of preserves stood in clusters of 3 or 4 upon each table, offering choices among strawberry jam, raspberry jam, blueberry preserves, orange marmalade in the bitter English style, and apple butter prepared from the orchards of Pennsylvania. Small pots of honey, both clover honey from the great prairie apiaries and darker buckwheat honey from the New England states, completed the bread service, accompanied by tiny silver spoons for the ladling of the various spreads upon the buttered toast. The coffee service at the Pullman breakfast was an art form unto itself, presided over by a particular waiter whose specialized duties involved the brewing and serving of this most essential of morning beverages. The coffee was made from beans that had been roasted in the dining car's own small roasting apparatus during the previous afternoon, the freshness of the roast being considered essential to the quality of the final brew. The grinding of the beans was performed immediately before each new pot was prepared. The brewing was conducted by means of an elaborate French press apparatus, and the finished coffee was served in tall silver pots that maintained its temperature throughout the leisurely course of the morning meal. Cream and sugar were offered in matching silver vessels, and travelers were invited to take their coffee in any combination of strengths and additions that suited their personal preferences. For those travelers who preferred tea to coffee, an equally elaborate tea service was available, offering a selection of black teas from India and Ceylon, green teas from China and Japan, herbal infusions of chamomile and mint and lemon verbena for those of more delicate constitution, and various blended teas combining the leaves of different gardens for particular flavor profiles. Each pot of tea was brewed individually for the diner who had requested it, the proper steeping time being carefully observed by the tea waiter, and the finished tea was served with a small silver strainer for catching any errant leaves that might escape from the pot. Lemon slices, milk, honey, and sugar were offered in the proper manner for each variety of tea, and the entire service was conducted with a degree of formality that reflected the importance of the morning beverage to the success of the breakfast experience. As the breakfast service progressed through its leisurely course, the dining car filled gradually with the cheerful murmur of morning conversation, the soft clink of silverware upon porcelain, the quiet movement of the waiters among the tables, and always beyond the windows, the steady passage of the prairie landscape rolling toward the western horizon. The travellers, refreshed by their night's sleep and warmed by the excellent food and drink of the breakfast service, settled into the calm satisfaction of beginning another day aboard the great travelling palace, their faces flushed with quiet pleasure, their conversations turning toward the prospects of the coming day, the sights they hoped to see along the route, and the destinations that lay still many hours ahead beyond the long western horizon. Among the many remarkable refinements aboard the Pullman Palace Car, the lavatory accommodations deserve a careful and respectful consideration, for they represented one of the most thoughtful innovations in the long history of comfortable travel, and their design and operation reflected the same patient attention to detail that characterized every other aspect of the Pullman experience. Located at one end of each sleeping carriage, the lavatory facilities were divided into separate compartments for ladies and gentlemen, each compartment fitted with appointments of considerable elegance and engineered with a level of practical sophistication that far exceeded anything available to most American travelers in their own homes during the era of the great railway's flowering. The gentleman's lavatory occupied a small chamber perhaps 8 feet square at the forward end of the carriage, its walls panelled in polished marble of a soft grey-veined variety, quarried from the mountains of Vermont. This marble had been cut into rectangular panels and fitted together with such precision that the seams between panels were nearly invisible. lending the chamber an atmosphere of cool, classical refinement that recalled the public baths of ancient Rome or the bathhouses of imperial Vienna. The floor was laid with smaller marble tiles in a pattern of alternating grey and cream colours, and the ceiling had been finished with embossed metal tiles painted in a soft cream white, the surfaces decorated with raised patterns of acanthus leaves and small floral medallions. Along one wall of the gentleman's lavatory stood a long marble counter fitted with 3 porcelain wash basins, each basin a generous oval of pure white porcelain, edged with a thin band of cobalt blue and bearing the discreet monogram of the Pullman Company at its centre. Above each basin was mounted a tall mirror in a frame of polished nickel, and beside each mirror a pair of brass hooks held fresh linen towels that the porter replaced several times throughout the day. The faucets that supplied water to the basins were among the most ingenious mechanisms aboard the carriage, for they had been engineered to draw water from large storage tanks located beneath the carriage, and to deliver this water at controllable temperatures, hot or cold or any combination thereof, by means of small porcelain handles bearing the elegant lettering H and C. The water supply system that served the lavatories represented a triumph of practical engineering, for the maintenance of clean, fresh water aboard a railway carriage rolling continuously across thousands of miles of varied terrain presented challenges that the Pullman engineers had solved with admirable ingenuity. Each carriage carried 2 large water tanks, one for hot water and one for cold, with the hot water tank connected to the steam line from the locomotive in such a manner that the water was warmed by the same heat that propelled the train forward. The tanks were filled at every major station along the route, with depot workers connecting hoses to special intake valves on the side of the carriage and pumping fresh water aboard until the tanks reached their full capacity. The water itself was drawn from sources of the highest quality, often from artesian wells that had been drilled specifically to supply the great railway depots with pure water for the passenger services. Along the wall opposite the wash basins, the gentleman's lavatory offered an array of grooming amenities that would not have been out of place in the dressing room of a fashionable hotel. A long shelf of polished walnut held a complete array of personal care items, all provided fresh for each new journey by the Pullman Company. There were combs and brushes of polished horn individually wrapped in paper and discarded after a single use, that the gentleman traveller might attend to his hair without resort to his own personal items. There were small bottles of bay rum and witch hazel for the aftershave toilette, jars of pomade in various scents for the dressing of moustaches and beards, and packages of fine talcum powder for application after washing. Small dishes held cakes of imported soap in several varieties, including French Castile soap for those of delicate skin, and stronger English soaps for those who preferred a more vigorous cleansing. The shaving accommodations deserved particular notice, for the morning shave was an important ritual for the gentleman traveller of the late 19th century, and the Pullman Company had taken considerable care to make this ritual as pleasant and convenient as possible. Folding leather strop hung beside one of the mirrors, that the gentleman might sharpen his straight razor before beginning his shave. Small cups of shaving soap, with their accompanying badger hair brushes, were available for those who had not brought their own. Hot water from the faucets, drawn at a temperature precisely calibrated for the comfort of shaving, made the work of removing the morning stubble a pleasure rather than a trial, and a long mirror, mounted at the proper height for the standing gentleman, allowed for the careful and accurate work of the razor across the lathered face. The ladies' lavatory, located at the opposite end of the carriage, was even more elaborately appointed than its gentleman's counterpart, for the Pullman Company recognized that the rituals of feminine toilette involved considerably more complexity than those of masculine grooming, and that the female travellers required a space both for the practical work of washing and dressing, and for the more leisurely pleasures of arranging hair, applying cosmetics, and adjusting the elaborate clothing that fashion demanded of women in the late 19th century. The walls of the ladies' lavatory were panelled in a softer pink-veined marble, and the floor was laid in a more intricate pattern of small mosaic tiles forming geometric designs in soft pastels. A particular feature of the ladies' lavatory was the dressing area, a small alcove fitted with a long upholstered bench covered in pale blue silk damask, where a lady might rest while attending to the time-consuming process of arranging her hair, or adjusting her undergarments. Above the bench, a tall mirror in a gilded frame allowed for the careful inspection of the entire outfit, and beside the mirror, a small writing desk provided a place where a lady might attend to any personal correspondence or make adjustments to her travel diary during the leisurely course of her morning toilette. Small lacquered box upon the writing desk contained a complete array of hairpins, small combs, ribbons, and other items needed for the arrangement of feminine hair in the elaborate styles then fashionable. The toilet compartment proper, in both the ladies' and gentlemen's lavatories, represented one of the most significant practical innovations of the Pullman cars, for these were among the first railway carriages to be equipped with proper flushing toilets connected to a sophisticated waste management system. The toilet itself was a porcelain fixture of considerable elegance, its bowl decorated with a delicate pattern of blue flowers, its seat of polished mahogany, and its flushing mechanism activated by a small chain hanging from a porcelain water tank mounted high above. The waste from these facilities was held in sealed containers beneath the carriage during transit and was disposed of properly at the major terminus stations, an arrangement that represented a considerable advance over the simpler systems used aboard less luxurious trains. The towels and linens supplied in the lavatories were of the finest quality, freshly laundered at every major station along the route by the depot laundry services with which the Pullman Company maintained long-standing contracts. The towels were of pure cotton, woven in a soft, absorbent texture and embroidered at one corner with the elegant Pullman crest in royal blue thread. They were stacked in neat piles upon brass shelves along one wall of the lavatory, and the porter replenished these stacks throughout the day, removing used towels for placement in covered hampers and replacing them with fresh ones from the carriage's linen storage compartments. The hampers themselves were lined with cedar to absorb any dampness, and they were emptied at every major station for laundering and refurbishment. Even the small details of the lavatory experience had been carefully considered by the Pullman designers. The light fixtures provided generous illumination for the careful work of grooming, with multiple bulbs arranged around the mirrors to eliminate harsh shadows that might interfere with the precise work of shaving or applying cosmetics. The ventilation system drew fresh air continuously through the lavatory chambers, ensuring that no unpleasant odors could accumulate even during periods of heavy use. Small porcelain vases of fresh flowers stood upon the marble counters, refreshed daily by the porter, lending a delicate fragrance and a touch of natural beauty to spaces that might otherwise have felt purely utilitarian. In every aspect of their design and operation, the lavatory accommodations of the Pullman Palace Car reflected the company's commitment to the proposition that even the most humble necessities of human existence deserve to be surrounded by beauty and conducted with grace. In the quiet hours of the late morning after the breakfast service had concluded and before the bustle of midday activities began, the gentlemen travellers aboard the Pullman Palace Car would often retreat to a particular space of the train designed expressly for their leisure and contemplation, chamber known throughout the Pullman fleet as the smoking lounge, or sometimes more simply as the gentleman's lounge. This space, typically located near the rear of the parlour car or sometimes in a dedicated section of the observation car, served as an informal club where men of similar station and inclination might gather for conversation, the enjoyment of tobacco, and the slow unwinding of thoughts that had begun to gather during the course of the morning's travel. The smoking lounge was decorated in a manner quite distinct from the more ornate spaces of the carriage, with an emphasis upon richer, darker tones and a more masculine aesthetic that recalled the gentlemen's clubs of London and New York. The walls were panelled in deep mahogany of an almost reddish hue, the wood selected for its particular grain pattern that suggested swirling currents of warm colour flowing through the surface of each panel. Above the wainscoting, the walls were covered with a fabric of olive green velvet, applied directly to the underlying panels and held in place by narrow strips of polished brass moulding. This combination of dark wood and dark green velvet created an atmosphere of comfortable seriousness, a sense of being within a refuge devoted to thoughtful pursuits. The furniture of the smoking lounge consisted primarily of deep leather armchairs and small leather-covered sofas, all upholstered in a rich oxblood leather that had been hand-rubbed with oils to bring out the natural variations in its colour. The chairs were generously proportioned, designed to accommodate the relaxed postures that gentlemen assumed when settling in for an extended period of conversation or reflection. Each chair was fitted with a small side table of polished walnut, upon which the occupant might place his cigar in a small brass ashtray, his glass of whiskey or brandy in its crystal tumbler, his pocket watch when consulted, whatever book or newspaper he might be perusing during his quiet hours in the lounge. The arrangement of the furniture allowed for both intimate conversation between 2 or 3 companions and for solitary contemplation by a gentleman who preferred his own thoughts to the company of others. The air of the smoking lounge, of course, was heavily perfumed with the rich and complex aromas of fine tobacco, for the entire purpose of the room was to permit the unrestricted enjoyment of cigars and pipes that would not have been welcome in the more refined precincts of the dining car or the parlour. The Pullman Company had taken particular care to install a powerful ventilation system in the smoking lounge, drawing the smoke outward through hidden brass grills set into the upper walls and replacing it continuously with fresh air drawn from special intake vents on the roof of the carriage. Despite the constant action of this ventilation system, however, the lounge maintained a permanent atmosphere of tobacco perfume, with the deeper notes of aged Cuban cigars mingling with the lighter scents of Virginia pipe tobacco, and the occasional sharper tang of Turkish cigarettes preferred by some of the more cosmopolitan travellers. Small humidor of polished cedar stood upon a side table at the entrance to the smoking lounge, offering a selection of fine cigars to those gentlemen who had not brought their own supply. The cigars were carefully selected by the Pullman Company from the finest plantations of Cuba and the Dominican Republic, and they were stored in the humidor at the precise temperature and humidity required to maintain their freshness and flavor. The humidor's interior was lined with Spanish cedar, a wood specifically chosen for its ability to enhance the aging of fine tobacco, and small dishes of distilled water set into hidden compartments maintained the proper moisture level throughout the long days of travel. A small silver cigar cutter with handles inlaid with mother-of-pearl lay beside the humidor, along with a brass tray of long wooden matches for the lighting of the chosen cigars. The conversations that unfolded in the smoking lounge during the quiet hours of late morning often touched upon the deeper questions that occupied the minds of educated American gentlemen of the late 19th century. There might be discussion of the political affairs of the day, the recent decisions of the Supreme Court, the prospects of the various candidates for the coming national elections, the diplomatic situation between the great powers of Europe, the latest reports from the long colonial expansion that European nations were conducting in distant Africa and Asia. There might be conversations about the rapid development of new technologies, the recent inventions of Mr. Edison and Mr. Bell, the prospects of electric lighting replacing gas in the great cities, the possible future of those strange new horseless carriages that some inventors were beginning to construct in their workshops. The travellers themselves represented a remarkable cross-section of American society at its most prosperous level. There might be a gentleman from Boston in the publishing trade, travelling to San Francisco to negotiate distribution agreements for his firm's latest series of historical novels. There might be a banker from New York returning from a journey to inspect his firm's investments in the cattle industry of the Western Territories. There might be a clergyman from Philadelphia travelling to a great religious conference in Chicago, preparing in his quiet hours the sermons he would deliver upon his arrival. There might be a manufacturer from Cleveland whose factories produced agricultural implements, travelling to the wheat-growing regions to gather information about the conditions and needs of his customers. Conversations between strangers in the smoking lounge tended to begin with the ritual courtesies that civilized men of that era observed in their dealings with one another. A gentleman entering the lounge for the first time would nod politely to those already present, find a seat in an unoccupied chair, and signal his readiness for conversation by some small gesture, perhaps the lighting of a cigar with deliberate care, the arrangement of his newspaper upon the side table beside him. If his neighbours were inclined toward conversation, they would offer some opening remark upon the weather, or upon the progress of the journey, or upon some recent item of news that had been the subject of general discussion. From these modest beginnings, the conversation might progress through stages of growing intimacy and depth, with the gentlemen revealing gradually their professions, their backgrounds, their travels, and finally their views upon whatever subjects might prove of mutual interest. Many lasting friendships were formed in the smoking lounges of the great Pullman trains, friendships that began with chance encounters during long cross-continental journeys and continued through subsequent decades of correspondence and occasional reunions. The Pullman Company itself recognized the social value of these encounters and encouraged its porters and stewards to facilitate introductions between travelers who shared common interests or backgrounds. A gentleman traveling to Chicago for a meeting of the American Bar Association might be introduced to another lawyer aboard the train who happened to be traveling to the same conference. Scientist heading to a conference of the American Association for the Advancement of Science might find himself in conversation with a colleague from a distant university whom he had previously known only through the pages of academic journals. The books available in the small library of the smoking lounge differed somewhat from those found in the parlor car library, reflecting the somewhat different tastes and interests of the masculine readership for whom this space was intended. Here might be found the latest works on financial and economic subjects, biographies of great American statesmen and military leaders, accounts of geographical exploration in the polar regions and the unmapped interiors of Africa and South America, and novels of more vigorous and adventurous character than those preferred by the genteel readers of the parlor car library. The volumes were bound in heavier leather of darker colors, their spines often inscribed in gold leaf with the titles and authors, and their pages had been chosen for their durability under the conditions of continual handling that the most popular volumes inevitably underwent. In the warm afternoon hours when the morning's vigorous conversations had given way to a more contemplative quiet, the smoking lounge often took on an atmosphere of profound peace. With 2 or 3 gentlemen sitting in their chairs reading or writing letters or simply gazing out the windows at the passing landscape, the smoke from their cigars curling slowly upward toward the ventilation grills, the soft tick of the small mantelpiece clock counting away the hours, and the steady rhythm of the rails providing a constant accompaniment to whatever private thoughts each gentleman might be entertaining within the quiet sanctuary of his own contemplation. While the gentlemen retired to their smoking lounge for the leisurely pursuits of tobacco and weighty conversation, the ladies who travelled aboard the Pullman Palace Car had at their disposal a space of equal refinement and quite different character. Chamber known throughout the Pullman fleet as the ladies' parlour, and which served as the principal social gathering place for the female travellers during the long hours of the journey. This parlour was typically located in a separate section of the observation car, or in a dedicated portion of the parlor car, situated in such a manner that the ladies might enjoy their own society without intrusion from the gentlemen's spheres of activity, while still being readily accessible to the dining car and the sleeping accommodations. The ladies' parlour was decorated in a manner that reflected the prevailing aesthetic preferences of refined feminine taste in the late 19th century, with a palette of softer and lighter tones than those used in the masculine smoking lounge. The walls were panelled in a pale satinwood, a wood of golden honey colour and lustrous grain that had been imported from the West Indies for its particular beauty and refinement. Above the wainscoting, the walls were covered with a wallpaper of pale rose, decorated with a delicate pattern of climbing roses entwined with green vines, the pattern repeated at intervals throughout the room and giving the entire space the impression of a small garden enclosed within 4 walls. The ceiling was finished in a soft cream white with raised plasterwork mouldings in the form of small floral medallions painted in pale gilt. The furniture of the ladies' parlour consisted of small upholstered chairs and dainty settees, all covered in fabrics of pale colours and elegant patterns. There were chairs upholstered in pale blue silk damask with patterns of peacock feathers, settees covered in cream-coloured velvet with embroidered borders of small pink flowers, and small reading chairs covered in a fabric of pale yellow with patterns of climbing ivy. The furniture pieces were arranged in conversational groupings of 3 or 4, with small round tables of polished cherry wood placed conveniently within reach of each grouping. Upon these tables stood arrangements of fresh flowers in small crystal vases, small dishes of delicate confections such as candied violets and miniature petit fours, and elegant tea services laid out in readiness for the inevitable afternoon tea that was the great social ritual of the parlour. The walls of the ladies' parlour were hung with a series of small paintings in gilded frames, watercolours and pastels depicting subjects judged appropriate for feminine contemplation. There were landscapes of pastoral scenes with grazing sheep and small thatched cottages, still life studies of fruit and flowers arranged upon polished wooden tables, portraits of beautiful young women in the attire of various historical periods, and scenes of children at play in summer gardens. The paintings had been selected with care by the Pullman Company's art consultants, who understood that the female traveller appreciated visual art that was beautiful, harmonious, and emotionally satisfying, art that might serve as a pleasant accompaniment to her own gentle reflections during the quiet hours of travel. Small upright piano of polished rosewood stood against one wall of the ladies' parlour, an instrument provided by the Pullman Company for the entertainment of those musical travellers who might wish to perform for the assembled ladies during the social hours of afternoon and evening. The piano was kept in perfect tune by the Pullman maintenance staff, who employed travelling tuners to inspect and adjust the instruments at the major terminus stations. Upon the piano's music rack stood selections of sheet music appropriate for the entertainment of a refined feminine audience, including parlour songs of sentimental nature, simple pieces by the great classical composers, than the more accessible works of contemporary composers whose music had become popular in the drawing rooms of fashionable American homes. The afternoon tea service was the central social ritual of the ladies' parlour, and it was conducted with a degree of formality and elegance that recalled the great houses of the English aristocracy. At precisely 4 o'clock each afternoon, the chief stewardess of the parlour would announce the commencement of the tea service, and the assembled ladies would gather around the larger tables that were specifically prepared for this purpose. The tea itself was served in pots of delicate porcelain decorated with rose patterns, accompanied by matching cups and saucers, small silver creamers and sugar bowls, and tiny silver tongs for the lifting of sugar lumps. The selection of teas offered at the afternoon service represented the finest products available from the great tea-growing regions of the world. There was Darjeeling tea from the high slopes of the Himalayan foothills, prized for its delicate flavour and pale amber colour. There was Earl Grey tea blended with bergamot oil according to the formula made famous by the second Earl Grey himself when he served as British Prime Minister in the 1830s. There was Lapsang Souchong, the smoky black tea from the Wuyi Mountains of China, beloved by those ladies whose tastes ran toward the more unusual and exotic flavours. There was English breakfast tea for those who preferred a strong and traditional brew, and there was jasmine tea for those who appreciated the floral perfume that this Chinese specialty offered. Accompanying the tea service was an array of small foods designed to satisfy the appetite without overwhelming it, in keeping with the refined principles of late afternoon refreshment. Small triangular sandwiches were arranged upon tiered silver platters, each sandwich a model of delicacy and precision. There were sandwiches of cucumber sliced paper-thin upon white bread spread with sweet butter, sandwiches of smoked salmon upon dark rye bread with a thin layer of cream cheese, sandwiches of watercress and butter upon brown bread, and sandwiches of cold roast chicken with a delicate herbed mayonnaise. Each sandwich was small enough to be consumed in 2 or 3 dainty bites, and each had been prepared by the dining car's pastry chef with the precision that characterized all aspects of the Pullman service. The sweet selections of the afternoon tea were even more elaborate than the savoury ones, reflecting the particular fondness for delicate confections that characterized the feminine palate of the era. There were small scones of golden brown perfection, served warm from the oven and accompanied by small dishes of clotted cream from the Devonshire region of England, along with crystal jars of strawberry jam and lemon curd. There were tiny cakes called petits fours, each one decorated with delicate icing in pastel colours, with miniature flowers and leaves piped in royal icing upon their tops. There were macarons in flavours of rose, pistachio, vanilla and chocolate, their delicate shells crisp against the soft buttercream filling within. There were shortbread cookies of golden brown perfection, dusted lightly with confectioner's sugar, and there were tarts filled with seasonal fruits arranged in patterns of considerable artistic beauty. The conversation that flowed through the ladies' parlour during the afternoon tea service possessed its own particular character and pace, distinct from the more vigorous discourse of the gentlemen's smoking lounge. The ladies tended to discuss topics of more personal and domestic nature, sharing news of their families, exchanging recipes and household tips, comparing notes on the latest fashions of Paris and London, and discussing the books and music that were currently popular among refined ladies of their acquaintance. There might be discussion of the children of the various ladies, with proud descriptions of academic accomplishments at fashionable boarding schools, accounts of the social debuts of older daughters, and tender observations about the development of young grandchildren. The ladies frequently exchanged information about the great social events of the season, the fashionable resorts where they planned to spend the summer months, the elegant restaurants and hotels they had recently visited, and the artistic and cultural offerings of the great cities through which they were traveling. There would be discussion of the latest plays in New York, the newest operas in Boston, the recent concert performances in Philadelphia, and the elegant balls and receptions that had marked the previous winter season in Washington. The conversation moved among these topics with a graceful fluidity, never lingering too long upon any single subject, never becoming too earnest or controversial, always maintaining the gentle rhythm of polite social discourse that was the highest art of late 19th century feminine sociability. There comes, in the long quiet hours of any extended journey by rail, a particular kind of reflection that arises naturally in the contemplative mind of the traveller, a kind of philosophical meditation upon the strange relationship between time and distance, between the steady passage of hours marked by the small ticking of pocket watches, and the equally steady unfolding of miles marked by the rhythmic clatter of wheels upon the iron rails. The Pullman Palace Car, by virtue of its extraordinary comfort and the duration of its journeys across the vast American continent, provided perhaps the ideal environment for such reflections, and many a thoughtful traveller has noted in their journals and letters the curious sense of dissolution and rearrangement that the nature of time seemed to undergo during these long and leisurely passages through the landscape. In the ordinary affairs of daily life, time tends to be measured in small, discrete units that mark the boundaries of various activities and obligations. There is the hour of waking, the hour of breakfast, the hour of beginning the day's work, the hour of lunch, the hour of returning home, the hour of dinner, the hour of evening leisure, and the hour of retiring to sleep. These hours are punctuated by the various tasks and meetings and duties that fill the working life of any productive citizen, and the mind grows accustomed to perceiving time as a sequence of relatively brief intervals, each one filled with its own particular content and connected to the next by some logical relationship of cause and effect. Aboard the Pullman Palace Car, however, time begins to assume a different character entirely, becoming more like a slowly flowing river than a sequence of discrete intervals. Then the mind of the traveller begins to perceive temporal duration as a continuous medium through which one moves, rather than as a series of marked-off points. The small daily routines that ordinarily structure the experience of time become attenuated and stretched, the breakfast service flowing leisurely into the late morning hours of reading and conversation, those hours flowing into the gentle rituals of the midday meal, which in turn flow into the long afternoon hours of contemplation and observation as the landscape rolls past beyond the windows. The evening, when it finally arrives, seems to have approached not by means of any abrupt transition, but rather as the natural deepening of a continuous golden afternoon into a continuous indigo dusk and then into a continuous starlit night. This altered perception of time produces in many travellers a curious sense of liberation from the ordinary anxieties that attend the rushing schedules of urban life. The traveller aboard the Pullman has nowhere to be except where the train is taking them, and the train itself proceeds at its own steady pace, neither hurrying nor delaying, simply moving forward through the great expanse of the continent with the patient rhythm that only a great machine moving over long distances can possess. There is no urgent meeting that one must attend, no important deadline that one must meet, no demanding correspondent who must receive an immediate reply. There is simply the journey itself, unfolding in its own time, requiring nothing of the traveller except the simple act of being present within it. And yet, paradoxically, this liberation from the ordinary measurements of time also produces a heightened awareness of certain other aspects of temporal experience kind of meditative attention to the small details of the passing moment that might be entirely overlooked in the busy course of ordinary life. The traveller aboard the Pullman has the leisure to observe the slow shifting of light across the polished surfaces of the carriage interior as the sun moves across the sky out. They have the leisure to contemplate the gradual transformation of the landscape as the train moves from one geographical region into another. They have the leisure to follow the slow rhythms of their own thoughts as those thoughts arise and develop and dissolve within the quiet hours of the afternoon. Time, no longer a hurried sequence of obligations, becomes a vast and patient medium within which the mind may explore its own deeper currents. The relationship between time and distance, as it presented itself to the contemplative traveller aboard the Pullman, possessed a peculiar quality that few other modes of conveyance could replicate. In the era before the great railways had connected the American continent, the journey from New York to San Francisco had required several weeks at minimum, with months being more typical for the careful traveller who proceeded by stagecoach across the western plains and through the mountain passes. The completion of the Great Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 had compressed this immense journey into a matter of days, an achievement so remarkable that many travellers of the late 19th century continued to marvel at it long after the practical novelty had passed. The Pullman Palace Car, with its luxurious accommodations and its provisions for the comfort of long-distance travel, transformed the experience of crossing the continent into something quite unlike any previous form of long-distance travel. The traveller boarded the train in one great city and disembarked in another great city, having spent perhaps 4 or 5 days within the enclosed world of the moving carriage, having passed through prairie and mountain and desert and forest, having dined and slept and conversed and read and reflected throughout the long, unbroken interval. The journey thus possessed a quality of compressed yet expansive duration, a sense that one had travelled through enormous distances, yet had also experienced a particular intensity of being present within a confined and elegant space. Many travellers of the era observed that this peculiar quality of Pullman travel seemed to produce certain kinds of philosophical and emotional insights that ordinary daily life rarely permitted. The slow passage of the landscape outside the windows, the rhythmic motion of the rails beneath the wheels, the soft golden glow of the lamps within the carriage, the gentle hum of conversation and the soft footsteps of the porters, all combined to create a kind of meditative environment in which the traveller's thoughts naturally turned toward the larger questions of existence. What was the meaning of one's own life within the vast scale of the continent through which the train was passing? What was the significance of one's small concerns within the long historical perspective that the journey naturally evoked? What was the relationship between the comfortable present moment, suspended in the warm interior of the carriage, and the great expanses of past and future that stretched outward from it in both temporal directions? The observation of the landscape itself, framed by the windows of the carriage, contributed to these reflections in important ways. The traveller watching the prairie roll past during the long afternoon hours could not help but be impressed by the immense scale of the American continent and by the relatively recent date at which this vast expanse had been brought within the scope of human civilization. Where now ran the steel rails of the great transcontinental railway, only a few decades earlier had stretched the unmapped grasslands traversed by herds of buffalo and bands of native peoples, whose ways of life had remained largely unchanged for centuries. Where now stood the proud depot buildings of small prairie towns, only a generation earlier had been wilderness in which the first European settlers had built their small log cabins and broken the prairie sod with their wooden ploughs. This sense of the rapid transformation of the continent could not help but impress upon the thoughtful traveller the remarkable nature of the historical moment in which they were privileged to be living. The 19th century, particularly its final decades, had witnessed an acceleration of human technical and social development that had no precedent in any previous era of history. The railroad itself, the steamship, the telegraph, the telephone, the electric lamp, the photograph, the phonograph, the bicycle, and countless other inventions had transformed the texture of daily life in ways that older travellers could remember from their own youth. Having grown up in a world that had been technically much closer to that of their grandparents than to that of their grandchildren, the Pullman Palace Car itself was a perfect symbol of this remarkable acceleration. for it represented the application of contemporary engineering and design to one of the oldest of human activities, the activity of long-distance travel. For thousands of years, human beings had traveled long distances by walking or riding upon animals, conveyances that had limited the speed and comfort of the journey to whatever the human body or its animal companions could endure. The Pullman, by contrast, offered comfort and elegance that were superior to those available in many private homes, while simultaneously moving the traveler across the continent at a pace that would have seemed magical to all previous generations of human beings. To recline in a velvet-upholstered armchair, sipping fine wine and reading a recent novel, while the great American continent rolled past beyond the window at 30 or 40 miles per hour, was to participate in a form of human experience that no previous era could have imagined. The Pullman Palace Cars that we have been quietly contemplating did not spring into existence by any accident of circumstance, nor were they the products of any single mind or hand, but rather they represented the cumulative achievement of thousands of skilled craftsmen and craftswomen who labored patiently in the great Pullman shops of Chicago and the company town that surrounded them, building these magnificent traveling palaces piece by piece with a level of dedicated attention to quality that seems almost incredible to consider from the vantage of our own more hurried era. The legacy of these unsung artisans deserves the same careful consideration that we have given to the spaces and rituals of the cars themselves, for it was their patient hands and trained eyes that translated the visions of the designers into the physical reality of polished wood, fitted brass, woven fabric, and painted plaster that we have been exploring throughout this gentle journey. The Pullman shops, located in the planned community of Pullman, Illinois, just south of Chicago, represented one of the most elaborate industrial complexes of the late 19th century, a self-contained city of workshops, foundries, mills, and assembly halls dedicated entirely to the production of the company's railway carriages. The shops occupied hundreds of acres of land, with great brick buildings whose interiors echoed with the constant sounds of carpentry, metalworking, glass-blowing, upholstery, painting, and 100 other crafts essential to the production of these elaborate machines. At the height of the company's operations, more than 10,000 workers labored within these shops, each of them contributing some particular skill to the great collective effort of producing carriages worthy of the Pullman name. The woodworking shops alone employed hundreds of skilled cabinet makers and joiners, men whose training in the traditional crafts of woodworking had often begun in their boyhood years and had continued through long apprenticeships that taught them every aspect of selecting, cutting, shaping, and finishing the various woods used in the construction of the carriages. These craftsmen worked with hand tools that had been refined through generations of use, planes and chisels and saws of various specialized configurations, each one chosen for its particular suitability to a specific task. The master cabinet makers, those at the highest level of skill, took particular pride in their ability to create joints between pieces of wood that fitted together with such precision that no glue or mechanical fastener was required to hold them firmly in place, the friction and the geometry of the joint itself being sufficient to maintain the integrity of the finished work. The selection of the woods themselves represented a craft of considerable expertise, exercised by specialists who spent their entire careers developing their ability to judge the quality of the lumber that arrived at the Pullman shops from forests across the continent and from distant lands as well. These wood selectors, working in the great drying yards where lumber was aged and stored, examined each plank with practiced eyes, looking for the subtle signs that distinguished excellent lumber from merely adequate. They considered the closeness and regularity of the grain, the absence of knots or other defects, the consistency of color from one end of the plank to the other, the moisture content as measured by various indirect indicators, and the overall sound of the wood when struck with a small mallet, that resonant note that experienced craftsmen could interpret as a measure of the wood's internal soundness. The metalworking departments of the Pullman shops were equally specialized and equally rich in the traditions of skilled craftsmanship. There were the brass foundries, where molten brass was cast into the various decorative fittings that ornamented every carriage, the door handles and lamp brackets and curtain rods and ornamental medallions that contributed so much to the elegant appearance of the finished cars, There were the iron forges where the heavier structural elements were shaped, the springs and brackets and hardware that held the entire carriage together. There were the silver shops where the table services and personal articles for the dining car and the lavatories were produced, each piece bearing the discreet Pullman monogram and finished to the highest standards of decorative craftsmanship. The brass workers in particular took a special pride in their craft, for the polished brass fittings of the Pullman carriages represented one of the most visible and distinctive features of the company's product, and the quality of these fittings was widely regarded as a hallmark of Pullman excellence. The casting of brass required a thorough understanding of the precise alloy compositions appropriate for various applications, the exact temperatures at which the metal should be poured into the molds, the proper cooling rates that would produce the densest and most defect-free castings, and the various polishing and finishing techniques that would bring the surface of the finished piece to its characteristic mirror-bright luster. Master brass workers spent their entire careers refining their understanding of these matters, and the finest of them were regarded throughout the industry as the unquestioned authorities in their craft. The upholstery shops of the Pullman works were staffed predominantly by women who brought to their craft the traditional skills of fine sewing and fabric handling that had been passed down through generations in many families. These women worked with fabrics of remarkable variety and quality. The deep velvets and rich damasks and intricate brocades that covered the seating in the various carriages, along with the heavier canvas materials used in the underlying construction of the seats and the leather hides used for the more durable applications in the smoking lounge. The work of cutting these expensive fabrics into the precise shapes required for each upholstery application demanded a level of skill and concentration that would have done credit to the finest haute couture establishments of Paris. The fitting and stitching of the upholstered pieces represented another stage of considerable craft expertise. The cushions and seat backs of each piece of furniture had to be filled with appropriate quantities of horsehair and down distributed evenly to provide proper support without lumps or hollow spots. The fabric covers had to be fitted over these fillings with great care, ensuring that the patterns of the fabric ran in the proper directions and that all seams were aligned with the structural lines of the underlying furniture frame. The final stitching that secured the fabric in place had to be performed with such uniform precision that no individual stitch was visibly different from any other, the entire seam appearing as a continuous line of even progression along the edge of the upholstered piece. The decorative painting of the interior surfaces represented yet another specialized craft tradition within the Pullman shops. The painted scenes that decorated the ceilings of certain cars, the gilded ornamental moldings, the painted floral designs upon the wallpapered surfaces, the lettering and numbering of the various exterior identifications, required artists of considerable skill working with traditional materials and techniques. The painters maintained their own studios within the larger shops, well-lit spaces equipped with easels and palette tables and storage cabinets for the various pigments and binders and varnishes that the work required. They worked in a manner that combined the careful precision of decorative painting with the artistic sensibility of fine art painting, treating each commission as a unique creative work that would be judged on its merits by the discerning eye of every passenger who entered the finished car. The glass workers who produced the etched and frosted glass panels for the carriage windows formed another small but highly specialized craft community within the Pullman shops. The art of glass etching, by which intricate decorative patterns were applied to the surface of plate glass through the controlled action of acid upon protected surfaces, required a thorough understanding of both the chemical processes involved and the artistic principles that governed the design of the patterns themselves. The glass workers prepared their patterns with great care, often beginning with detailed drawings made by skilled designers, then transferring these drawings to the surface of the glass by means of acid-resistant coatings that protected certain areas while leaving others exposed to the etching action. Throughout all these various specialized shops and the work they performed, a particular ethos prevailed that distinguished the Pullman enterprise from many of its industrial contemporaries. This ethos held that the production of railway carriages was not merely a commercial activity to be performed as efficiently and inexpensively as possible, but rather a craft enterprise in which the quality of the finished product was the supreme consideration. The company actively encouraged the development of skill among its workers, established training programs for apprentice craftsmen, provided steady employment that allowed workers to develop their abilities over the course of long careers, and fostered an institutional culture that took genuine pride in the excellence of the finished cars that emerged from the great assembly halls. The legacy of this craft tradition lived on in every Pullman carriage that rolled across the continent, embodying within its polished surfaces and finely fitted joinery the patient hands and skilled eyes of the thousands of craftsmen and craftswomen who had brought it into being. To travel aboard the Pullman Palace Car was to be granted a privileged perspective upon the vast and varied landscape of the American continent, perspective made possible by the great windows that lined every passenger car and that offered an ever-changing panorama of geographical and cultural transitions during the long journey from one coast to the other. These windows were not merely apertures through which one might glimpse the passing scenery, but rather they functioned as carefully framed proscenium arches that presented the American landscape in a manner not unlike that of a continuous unfolding theatrical production, with each region offering its own distinctive scenery, its own particular cast of characters glimpsed in passing, and its own subtle thematic variations upon the great national epic of westward expansion and continental settlement. The journey from the eastern seaboard to the western coast of the continent passed through such a remarkable variety of geographical regions that the contemplative traveller aboard a Pullman car could acquire in the space of a few days an education in American geography that would have required months of conventional travel to obtain by any other means. The train departing from New York or Boston would first pass through the gentle rolling landscape of the eastern Pennsylvania farmlands, with their patchwork quilts of small fields divided by stone walls and traversed by winding country roads. The traveller watching from the carriage window would observe the white-painted farmhouses with their attached barns, the ancient stone bridges spanning small streams that emerged briefly from the surrounding woods before disappearing again into the next stand of trees, and the small villages that appeared at regular intervals along the railway line, each one centred upon its white-steepled church and its modest commercial main street. As the train continued westward, this landscape would gradually transform into the more rugged terrain of the Allegheny Mountains, with their darker forests of mixed deciduous and evergreen trees, their steeper slopes and deeper valleys, their occasional glimpses of distant ridges receding in shades of progressively paler blue toward the horizon. The railway line through these mountains had been constructed at considerable expense and difficulty, with long tunnels bored through solid rock and extensive cuttings made through the steeper hillsides. The traveller watching from the window during this section of the journey would observe the small mining towns nestled in the valley bottoms, the great industrial complexes of Pittsburgh with their towering smokestacks and constant orange glow from the steel furnaces, and the slow unwinding of the Ohio River as it followed its meandering course westward toward the Mississippi. The transition from the mountains to the great plains of the central continent occurred gradually, with the landscape opening out in stages from the rolling hills of central Ohio and Indiana into the flatter terrain of central Illinois and Iowa, tanned finally into the vast unbroken horizon of the true prairie lands of Nebraska and Kansas. This transition was perhaps the most striking geographical contrast available to the cross-continental traveller, as the constrained and intimate landscape of the eastern regions gave way to the immense open spaces of the western interior, where the eye could see nothing in any direction but the gentle curve of the earth's surface meeting the vast dome of the sky overhead. The first sight of the true prairie horizon, stretching away to a perfectly level line at the very edge of vision, often produced in eastern travellers a sense of awe and disorientation, though they had emerged suddenly from a comfortable enclosed room into an enormous outdoor amphitheatre of unimaginable size. The prairie itself, observed during the long hours of summer travel, presented a panorama of subtle and constantly changing beauty that rewarded the patient attention of the contemplative traveller. The grasslands, which appeared at first glance to be merely uniform expanses of green or gold, revealed themselves upon closer attention to be remarkably complex ecosystems containing dozens of different grass species, each with its own particular height and colour and seasonal rhythm. There were the tall prairie grasses of the eastern grasslands, which could grow to such heights that they obscured the riders of horses passing through them, and there were the shorter buffalo grasses of the western plains, which had evolved their compact growth habit in response to the grazing patterns of the great herds that had once dominated those regions. Among the grasses grew countless species of wildflowers, blooming in their seasonal sequences from the early spring violets and prairie crocuses through the summer black-eyed Susans and prairie clover to the autumn asters and goldenrod that turned the landscape into a tapestry of yellow and purple in the weeks before the first frost. The small towns of the prairie, glimpsed in passing from the windows of the train, told their own quiet stories of frontier settlement and the patient work of community building that had transformed the wilderness of the previous generation into the established farming communities of the present moment. Each town possessed its characteristic features: the grain elevator rising tall beside the railway line, the depot building with its small platform and signal arm, the main street running perpendicular to the railway with its modest collection of stores and offices, the church spires rising above the modest houses, the small cemetery on the outskirts of town, with its rows of marble markers commemorating the early settlers who had given their lives to establish these communities upon the land that had previously known only the patient passage of buffalo herds and the occasional band of native peoples following the seasonal migrations of the game. The transition from the prairie to the mountains of the Rocky Mountain region was marked by gradual rising of the terrain through the long high plains of Colorado and Wyoming, regions that combined the openness of the prairie with the steady climb toward the dramatic peaks that loomed in the distance. The Rocky Mountains themselves, when the train finally entered their narrow passes and began the difficult ascent through the Continental Divide, presented some of the most spectacular scenery available anywhere in the world, with their jagged peaks of bare rock rising thousands of feet above the timberline, their deep valleys filled with the dark forests of pine and spruce, their swift mountain streams tumbling down through stone-strewn canyons, tanned their isolated mining towns nestled in remote valleys that seemed almost unconnected to the rest of the continent. The descent from the mountains into the Great Basin region of Utah and Nevada brought the traveler into yet another distinctive landscape, the high desert of the Intermountain West with its sparse vegetation of sagebrush and bunchgrass, enormous distances marked by isolated mountain ranges rising abruptly from the otherwise flat valley floors, its remarkable plays of light and shadow as the sun moved across the landscape during the long daylight hours, and its astonishing displays of stars during the clear nights when the train continued its westward progress through the otherwise empty country. The Great Salt Lake itself, glimpsed briefly during the passage through northern Utah, presented one of the most peculiar geographical features of the entire continent, its waters more saline than those of the ocean, its surface reflecting the surrounding mountains and sky with the almost mirror-like precision that only intensely salt water could achieve. The final segment of the cross-continental journey from the high desert into the fertile valleys of California completed the geographical education of the Pullman traveler with yet another remarkable transition. The descent from the Sierra Nevada through the western foothills brought the train into the Central Valley of California, with its rich agricultural land stretching for hundreds of miles in either direction, its citrus groves and vineyards and orchards of stone fruit, its small farming communities and its rapidly growing cities. The arrival at last in San Francisco with its dramatic bay and its hilly streets and its magnificent harbor opening westward toward the Pacific Ocean completed the journey across the continent with a final geographical revelation: the Great Pacific itself, the western boundary of the American land, the far edge of the continental adventure that had begun thousands of miles to the east upon the platform of a different great city. The thoughtful traveler, having watched this entire panorama unfold beyond the windows of the Pullman car, descended onto the western platform with a deepened understanding of the vastness and variety of the American landscape, and with a quiet sense of having participated, however passively, when As the great age of the Pullman Palace Car drew slowly toward its eventual conclusion in the middle decades of the 20th century. Those who had loved and depended upon these elegant travelling palaces watched with a kind of melancholy resignation as the world that had nurtured the Pullman experience gradually transformed into something quite different, something faster perhaps, and certainly more efficient by various practical measurements, yet something that lacked the particular qualities of unhurried elegance and patient craftsmanship that had defined the golden years of luxury rail travel. The decline of the Pullman tradition was not a sudden collapse, but rather a long, gradual fading like the slow autumn passage of a once vibrant garden into the quiet dormancy of winter, with each passing decade bringing further reductions in the scope and frequency of the services that had once seemed as permanent and inevitable as the rails themselves. The first signs of the great transformation appeared in the early 20th century, with the rapid development of the automobile, which had begun as a curious novelty in the 1890s and which had developed within a single generation into a transportation option available to vast numbers of American families. The automobile offered a kind of personal mobility that no railway could match, the ability to depart at any hour from any location and to travel to any other location at any pace one chose, with the freedom to stop along the way whenever and wherever one wished. For shorter and medium-distance travel, the automobile rapidly became the preferred option of most travellers, and the local and regional passenger services of the railways began to decline as the new highways spread across the country. The Pullman Company itself, recognizing these changing patterns, attempted to adapt by focusing its efforts upon the longer cross-continental journeys for which the automobile remained impractical, and by introducing new car designs that featured even more elaborate appointments and additional services intended to maintain the traditional appeal of luxury rail travel. The streamlined trains of the 1930s and 40s, with their smooth aerodynamic exteriors and their modernized interiors, featuring such innovations as roomette accommodations and observation domes, represented the company's most ambitious efforts to remain competitive in a rapidly changing transportation landscape. For a time, these efforts achieved considerable success, particularly during the years of the Second World War, when civilian travel was severely restricted and the railways carried unprecedented numbers of passengers, both military and civilian, across the wartime continent. The years immediately following the war initially appeared to promise a continuation and even an expansion of the great Pullman tradition, as returning soldiers and prosperous wartime workers flocked to the railways for vacation travel and business journeys throughout the country. The new streamlined trains became symbols of post-war American prosperity, with their gleaming aluminum exteriors and their colourful paint schemes representing the optimistic spirit of the era. The Pullman Company enjoyed a brief renaissance with its sleeping cars carrying record numbers of passengers across routes that ranged from the traditional eastern corridors to the newer cross-continental routes serving the rapidly developing western states. This post-war resurgence proved, however, to be the final great chapter of the Pullman story, rather than the beginning of a new era of expansion. The development of commercial aviation during the late 1940s and through the 1950s created a new form of long-distance transportation that could traverse the continent in a matter of hours rather than the days required by even the fastest railway services. The first generation of airliners, the propeller-driven aircraft that connected the major cities during this period, offered a speed advantage over the railways that no amount of luxury or service could overcome for travelers whose primary concern was reaching their destinations as quickly as possible. The introduction of jet airliners in the late 1950s accelerated this transformation, reducing transcontinental flight times to a small fraction of what railway travel required, and effectively ending the role of the railways as the primary means of long-distance passenger transportation in America. The Pullman Company itself, which had been operated for decades as a subsidiary of various railway corporations following antitrust actions in the early 20th century, eventually ceased its sleeping car operations entirely in 1968, after more than a century of service to the travelling public. The remaining sleeping car services that continued to operate on certain long-distance routes were gradually absorbed into the new national passenger railway system that was created in 1971 to maintain whatever rail services could be sustained in the new transportation environment. The great Pullman shops in Illinois, which had once employed thousands of skilled craftsmen in the production of the most elegant railway carriages in the world, were gradually closed and eventually demolished, their sites converted to other uses or returned to the prairie from which they had originally been carved. Yet, despite this decline of the operational Pullman tradition, the legacy of these remarkable carriages did not entirely disappear, for a significant number of the original Pullman Palace cars were preserved by various railway museums and historical societies, and a smaller number remained in operational condition through the dedicated efforts of railway enthusiasts and private collectors who recognized the historical and aesthetic significance of these vessels of an earlier age. Some of the most beautiful examples of Pullman cars now reside in museums where they may be visited and studied by present-day travelers who wish to gain some understanding of the experience that earlier generations took for granted as the standard of long-distance travel. Other cars have been restored to operational condition and may occasionally be seen carrying passengers on special excursions over various preserved railway lines throughout the country. The visitor who tours one of these preserved Pullman Palace cars in the present era cannot fail to be impressed by the extraordinary level of craftsmanship that went into their construction, by the patient attention to detail that characterized every aspect of their design, and by the quiet elegance that pervaded their interior spaces. Standing within the polished mahogany corridor of a preserved Pullman sleeper, one feels something of the atmosphere that the original passengers experienced during the long crossings of the American continent. The same brass fittings still gleam upon the wall sconces, the same intricate carving still adorns the door panels, the same heavy crimson velvet still hangs at the windows, and the same deep silence still pervades the carpeted floors. For a few quiet moments the visitor may stand within the preserved space and feel the gentle ghosts of all those previous travellers who once made their way through these same corridors during the slow golden years of luxury rail travel. The preservation of these physical artifacts has been complemented by the equally important preservation of the records, photographs, letters, and other documentary materials that allow modern historians and enthusiasts to reconstruct the daily life and operational details of the great Pullman era. Major archives at various universities and historical societies hold extensive collections of Pullman Company records, including the meticulous service manuals that documented every aspect of porter training, the elaborate menus from the dining cars, the architectural drawings of the various car designs, and the personal correspondence of the company's founders and senior executives. These archival materials, combined with the surviving physical artifacts, provide an unusually complete picture of an industrial and service enterprise that no longer exists in its original form. The cultural memory of the Pullman tradition has also been preserved through various forms of literature, film, and other artistic expression that have drawn upon the imagery and atmosphere of luxury rail travel as settings for stories and meditations upon the nature of journeys and human encounters. The classic novels of the early 20th century, from the works of Edith Wharton to those of Willa Cather, often featured scenes set aboard the great trains of the era, capturing in their prose the particular atmosphere of these travelling environments. The films of the 1930s and 40s, from the romantic comedies to the murder mysteries, frequently used Pullman cars as their settings, contributing to the continuing romantic associations that the public maintained with luxury rail travel, even as the practical role of the railways diminished. The thoughtful traveller of the present era who reflects upon this legacy may perhaps find a kind of consolation in the recognition that, while the operational reality of the Pullman tradition has largely passed into history, the values that it embodied have not been entirely lost. The patient attention to craftsmanship, the dedication to providing genuine comfort and elegance, the respect for the dignity of all participants in the travelling experience, the careful consideration of every detail that contributes to a satisfying journey, these qualities continue to exist in various contemporary contexts and to inspire those who appreciate the deeper values that lay beneath the surface beauty of the great Pullman cars. The slow journey across the American continent, conducted with patience and grace within an environment of beauty and comfort, remains a possibility for those who seek it out, even if the specific form that this journey now takes differs considerably from the form it took in the golden era of the Pullman Palace Car. The hour grows late now, gentle traveller, and the rhythms of the great Pullman carriage have slowed once again into the deep, steady pulse of the late evening hours, that quiet time when the day's conversations have drifted into silence, when the lamps have been dimmed to their softest settings, when the porter has completed his evening rounds and retired to his small service compartment, and when the carriage moves through the dark prairie like a quiet lantern carried gently across an endless plain. The passengers have settled themselves into their berths behind the drawn velvet curtains, their breathing slow and regular now, their dreams beginning to form in the warm darkness of their sleeping compartments. The rails sing their soft, steady song beneath the wheels, that gentle metallic music of motion that has accompanied the travellers throughout the long day, and that continues now as the perfect lullaby for the deepening hours of the night. Allow your attention to soften now, gentle traveller, as you drift slowly toward the warm shores of sleep. Notice the gentle sway of the carriage as it rolls along the rails, that soft side-to-side motion that mimics the rocking of a cradle, that ancient rhythm that has soothed children into sleep since the earliest days of human existence. Notice how this gentle motion seems to dissolve any remaining tension within your shoulders and your back, how it eases your breathing into a slower and deeper pattern, how it draws your awareness gradually inward toward the quiet center of your own peaceful being. The carriage rocks gently, 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 and you rock with it, suspended in this perfect rhythm of motion and rest. Listen to the soft sounds that fill the quiet carriage during these late hours of the journey. There is the distant hum of the locomotive somewhere far ahead, that deep mechanical heartbeat that drives the entire train forward through the night. There is the gentle creak of the carriage frame as it flexes and adjusts to the small variations in the railway track. There is the soft whisper of the wind passing along the exterior of the carriage as it moves through the still prairie air. There is the occasional faint chime of a small brass bell from somewhere within the corridor, perhaps the chiming of the small clock that marks the passing hours, perhaps the distant signal of the locomotive announcing its passage to some unseen and unmanned crossing far ahead in the darkness. Beneath all these gentle sounds runs the steady, hypnotic rhythm of the wheels upon the rails, that constant clack, 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 clack that has provided the auditory foundation of the entire Pullman experience throughout the long hours of the journey. This rhythm, you may now allow yourself to notice, has become as familiar to you as the beating of your own heart, as the soft sound of your own breathing, as the gentle pulse of your own quiet thoughts. The rhythm of the rails matches the rhythm of your breathing now, slow and steady, slow and steady, slow and steady, each breath drawing you deeper into the warm, peaceful state that surrounds you on every side. Consider for a moment the soft amber glow of the small night lamp that illuminates the corridor outside your compartment door. That single gentle source of light that has been left burning throughout the night for the convenience of any traveller who might need to find their way along the corridor during the small hours of the morning. The lamp's flame burns steadily within its etched glass globe, casting a soft circle of warm light upon the polished oak walls, the deep crimson runner carpet, and the brass fittings of the corridor sconces. This single lamp serves as a kind of small lighthouse within the darkness of the night carriage, a quiet beacon of soft illumination that reassures any wakeful traveller that the carriage continues to be tended and watched over even during these deepest hours of the journey. The same warm amber glow filters softly through the small ventilation panels above your compartment door, drifting into the dim space of your private chamber, and creating gentle patterns of soft light upon the velvet curtains drawn across your window, upon the polished wood panelling of the walls, upon the white linen sheets, and the heavy woolen blankets that cover your berth. This soft, indirect lighting creates an atmosphere of profound peace and security, a sense of being held within a small protected space surrounded by gentle warmth and quiet comfort, like a small bird sheltered within the warm hollow of a great tree during a long winter night. The fragrance of the carriage during these late evening hours has its own particular character, distinct from the brighter fragrances of the daytime activities, yet equally pleasant in its own quiet way. The lingering perfume of the evening's beeswax polish drifts gently through the still air, mingling with the faint sweetness of the lavender that has been tucked into the linen storage compartments. There is the soft trace of the cedar from the carriage's interior woodwork, that warm and woody scent that grows slightly stronger during the cooler hours of the night when the wood releases its accumulated daytime warmth. There is the faintest hint of the freshly laundered linens of your berth, those clean and slightly starchy sheets that the porter prepared during the evening transformation of your compartment from its daytime to its nighttime configuration. Beneath all these subtle fragrances runs the gentle, omnipresent perfume of the carriage's interior fabrics, the deep velvet of the upholstery, the woven wool of the carpets, the soft cotton of the curtains, the leather of certain decorative accents, combining into a single warm and comforting aroma that has come to seem entirely natural to you during the long hours of your journey. This aroma is the smell of safety and comfort, the smell of being well cared for in a beautiful enclosed space, the smell of quiet refuge during a long passage through the dark and unknown spaces of the night world beyond the windows. Allow your attention to drift now toward the warm embrace of the bedding that surrounds you in your berth. Notice the smooth, cool softness of the white cotton sheets against your skin, those finely woven sheets that have been laundered to perfect crispness and pressed to mirror smoothness before being spread upon your bed by the patient hands of the porter. Notice the gentle weight of the heavy woolen blanket that lies above you, providing just the right amount of warmth and comforting pressure to ease your body into deeper relaxation. Notice the soft, yielding cushion of the down pillow beneath your head, that perfect balance of softness and support that cradles your neck and shoulders in gentle comfort. Notice how the gentle motion of the carriage transmits itself through the entire structure of the berth and into your own body, that slow rocking sensation that mimics the most ancient of human experiences, the experience of being held safely within a moving cradle, the experience of being carried through the world while one's own body rests in passive trust upon the protection and movement provided by some larger and more capable agency. This sensation of being carried, of being moved through the world without any effort of one's own, is one of the most profound forms of relaxation available to the human spirit, and you may allow yourself now to surrender entirely to this beautiful sensation, release any remaining sense of needing to direct or control your own progress, to trust completely in the steady forward motion of the great train as it carries you onward through the deep night. The thoughts that arise within your mind during these final moments before sleep are themselves growing softer and more diffuse, like clouds dissolving slowly in the warm air of a summer afternoon. The vivid images of the day's experiences, the conversations with fellow travelers, the meals in the dining car, the views of the passing landscape, the small ceremonies of the evening hours, These begin to blend together into a single gentle current of impression that flows softly through your consciousness without demanding any particular attention or response. You may notice these soft images drifting past, but you do not need to hold on to any of them, do not need to analyze or remember them, do not need to do anything at all but allow them to pass through your awareness like the gentle landscape rolling past beyond the curtained windows of your compartment. The weight of your eyelids grows heavier now, gentle traveler, like the weight of soft snow gathering upon the branches of a quiet winter forest. Your breathing has become slower and deeper, each breath drawing you further into the warm, peaceful state that surrounds you on every side. The rhythm of the rails continues its steady, hypnotic song beneath the wheels, that perfect lullaby that has accompanied countless travelers through countless quiet nights across the long history of the great Pullman tradition. You are completely safe now, completely warm, completely held within the soft embrace of this beautiful traveling palace as it carries you gently through the darkness toward the distant promise of morning. Drift now, gentle traveler, into the deep and peaceful sleep that awaits you, and allow the steady song of the rails to carry you onward into your own quiet dreams. And now we have come together, gentle traveler, to the final softening of the long journey. That quiet moment when even the gentle rocking of the carriage seems to slow and dissolve into the deeper rhythm of sleep itself, when the boundaries between the warm enclosed world of the Pullman Palace Car and the boundless world of dreams begin to blur and merge into a single continuous landscape of peace and rest. The night has reached its deepest hour now, and the great train continues its patient progress through the vast darkness of the prairie, carrying its sleeping passengers onward through the silence of the empty land, while the stars wheel slowly overhead in their ancient and unhurried dance across the endless dome of the sky. There is nothing more for you to do now, nothing more for you to think about, nothing more for you to attend to in any way. The journey continues without requiring any effort on your part. The great machine of the train moves forward with its own unstoppable momentum. The patient hands of the engineers at the front of the locomotive guide the journey through the night. The watchful eyes of the porters in their service compartments keep their gentle vigil over the sleeping passengers. The rails themselves stretch onward into the infinite distance, leading the train along their predetermined path toward the distant destination that awaits at the end of the long, peaceful crossing. You may release now, gentle traveller, any remaining concerns about the world beyond this quiet carriage, any remaining thoughts about tasks to be completed or problems to be solved, any remaining attention to the small, busy concerns of waking life. None of these things has any place within this deep and peaceful realm of late-night travel. They will all be there waiting for you, of course, when you eventually return to the world of waking responsibilities at some distant moment in the future. But they have no claim upon you now, no power to disturb the deep rest that you may now allow yourself to experience completely and without reservation. Let them all drift away from you like gentle mist, dispersing in the soft warmth of an early morning sun. Notice once again the steady rhythm of your breathing, that slow and gentle pattern that has slowed and softened over the course of this quiet evening until it has become barely perceptible, as soft and gentle as the rhythm of a sleeping child's breath, steady and patient as the rhythm of the great rails beneath the wheels of the carriage. Each breath flows in and out of your body with the same effortless ease as the train flows along its iron path through the night. There is no separation now between the rhythm of your own breath and the rhythm of the train's progression and the rhythm of the night itself. All these rhythms have merged into a single great pulse of peaceful motion that carries you gently onward toward the deep and restorative sleep that awaits you. Allow your awareness to drift slowly outward from the warm compartment of your berth, drifting softly through the carriage walls and out into the immense darkness of the surrounding night. The carriage itself, viewed from outside, appears as a small jewel of warm golden light moving through the vast black expanse of the sleeping prairie, its windows glowing faintly through their drawn curtains. Interior illuminated by the single dim lamp that burns through the night for the comfort of any wakeful traveller. The carriage moves silently through the darkness, its passage marked only by the steady rhythm of the rails and the gentle plume of steam from the locomotive far ahead. Beyond the carriage, the prairie stretches outward in every direction toward horizons that disappear into the deepest darkness. The vast grasslands lie still beneath the starlight, their countless plants and small creatures all sleeping quietly through the night hours, awaiting the slow arrival of dawn many hours from now. The small farms and villages along the railway line lie equally quiet, their windows mostly dark, their inhabitants asleep in their beds, their cattle and horses standing patient and still in their barns and pastures. The entire vast landscape rests in deep peace, gathering its strength for another day of patient growth and gentle activity that will begin slowly and unhurriedly with the first rosy light of the eastern dawn. Above the resting prairie and the moving train, the sky stretches outward into the infinite distance of the cosmos, its dome filled with countless stars that wheel slowly through their ancient patterns. The constellations of the late summer sky are visible in their familiar arrangements. The Great Bear walking patiently around the polar star, the Swan flying southward along the silver river of the Milky Way, the Dragon coiling around the pole of the heavens. Each star burns steadily in its own infinite distance, sending its faint light across the vast emptiness of space to fall at last upon the quiet prairie and the moving train and the sleeping passengers who lie peacefully within their berths. The rhythm of the rails continues its steady song beneath the wheels. Gentle traveller, slow and patient and completely reliable, listen to it now as your awareness drifts ever softer and more diffuse, ever closer to the warm shores of complete sleep. The rhythm continues, the rhythm continues, the rhythm continues. Each repetition of this steady sound carries you a little deeper into the warm peace of slumber, a little further from the busy world of waking concerns, a little closer to the deep restorative rest that your spirit has been seeking throughout the long day. The rhythm continues and you drift, and the rhythm continues and you drift, and the rhythm continues. The amber glow of the small night lamp continues to filter softly through the ventilation panels above your compartment door, casting its gentle patterns of warm light upon the surfaces of your private chamber. The soft sounds of the carriage continue to murmur quietly around you, the gentle creaks and hums and distant rhythms that have become as familiar to you as the small sounds of your own home. The fragrance of the polished wood and the freshly laundered linens and the softly burning lamp oil continues to fill the still air of your compartment with its complex tapestry of comforting aromas. All these gentle qualities of the carriage continue to surround you, holding you safe within their warm embrace, supporting your transition from the world of waking awareness into the deep and peaceful realm of restorative sleep. You may notice now, perhaps, that the boundary between your waking consciousness and the realm of dreams has grown thin and indistinct, that images and impressions are beginning to drift through your mind in patterns that no longer follow the logical sequences of waking thought. Perhaps you are watching the prairie roll past beyond a window that has somehow opened in your dreams. Perhaps you are walking through a long corridor of polished oak that extends impossibly far in both directions. Perhaps you are sitting in a velvet armchair beside a window that looks out upon a landscape that combines features from many different parts of your life into a single beautiful and impossible scene. These are the gentle beginnings of dreams, gentle traveller, and you may welcome them now with the same calm acceptance that you have brought to every other aspect of this long and peaceful journey. Drift now, gentle traveller, into the deep and lasting sleep that awaits you. The great train will continue its patient journey through the night, carrying you safely across the long miles toward whatever distant destination awaits at the end of the rails. The porters will keep their gentle vigil throughout the dark hours. The engineers will guide the locomotive with their steady hands. The rails will sing their soft hypnotic song beneath the wheels. The stars will wheel slowly overhead through the great dome of the sky. The prairie will rest in deep peace beneath the dark blanket of the night. And you, gentle traveller, will rest as well, held safely within the warm and beautiful embrace of this quiet travelling palace that has carried so many countless travellers through so many countless peaceful nights across the long, long history of the great American railways. Sleep now, gentle traveller, sleep deeply and peacefully, sleep through the long hours of the prairie night. Sleep until the soft rose light of the eastern dawn touches the tops of the distant hills. Sleep until the gentle sound of the porter's silver bell announces the arrival of another quiet morning. Sleep with the rhythm of the rails as your lullaby and the warm embrace of the carriage as your shelter and the great patient journey of the night as your dream. Sleep, gentle traveller, sleep. The lantern in the window burns softly, the rails sing their steady song, the carriage rocks gently, 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 and the long horizon of dreams stretches outward before you, peaceful and endless, into the deep and beautiful night. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. Sleep well. The quiet backstage of the luxurious Pullman trains crossing America has carried you. Gentle traveller, the way to Protestant Hall, the way home. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.